March the 6th, 1986, with the purpose of having an interview with a couple that are well known in this area as being related to the Jesse James of Missouri. It's our purpose today to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Everhard and have interviews, question and answers, so that the people today, tomorrow, and in future generations will have an opportunity to see the actual blood kin cousin of Jesse James, the famous outlaw of Missouri of the 1870s and 1880s. It gives me a great deal of pleasure at this time to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Aubrey Everhard. Ms. Everhard and Aubrey, we are delighted to be in your home today and have this opportunity to talk with you and to discuss the many important things that have never been recorded in the printed books of history. We know that you are blood kin to Jesse James, and for the past 40 or 50 years, you have had the opportunity to meet and be in the company of Jesse James, and during his days of old age, and when he was down and ill, and you took care of him, had him in the hospital, and with those close associations, you were able to find out many things about Jesse and his life that no person, living or dead, had that opportunity. And we know that both of you have been eager to bring to the surface these true facts that history has muddled up by people writing books, fiction, rather than real historical facts. Now, Mr. Everhard, we appreciate you being here and giving us opportunity to be with your wife and to share the things of history that we hope someday that will change the pages of history, and we can do away with all these legends that have poisoned the true facts of history. We thank you very much, Aubrey.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
Now,
Very welcome.
thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask Ms. Everhard, we're going to start back and we're going to put it in a kind of a story form, because in this way we can cover the entire life history in just a short time, and we'll learn more about Jesse than anyone ever dreamed of. Now, Ms. Everhard, let me ask you this question. How did you first learn that I was a historian and that I was interested in bringing the Western life back to reality?
I read an article that you had in the Lovington paper, searching for someone that could give you information about Billy the Kid. And so I called to get in touch with him.
All right, I remember that day very distinctly because...
That is exactly how I first, and I talked to the man you was working with at that time.
And I remember I asked you when could I come visit you after you extended me the invitation, and I came over here the next day, and I spent
the same day.
The same day.
Same day.
And I was delighted when I found out that from what you had in your possession, books and manuscripts and pictures and everything, I had never seen anything like it on Jesse James, and I had been a historian for many years.
That's where you seen the picture that showed you that Billy and Jesse was close friends.
That's right. Now, Ms. Everhard, let's go back to the very beginning. How do you claim to be blood kin to Jesse Woodson James?
Jesse Woodson James's mother and my great-grandmother, my mother's father's mother, were sisters.
Well, where did they live? Do you know?
My great-grandmother and great-grandfather lived in Tennessee.
I see.
And of course, Jesse's folks lived in Missouri, but they're not very far apart. See, those two states are not. And that's how the kinship comes about. My mother's father was the first cousin of Jesse James.
Now, Ms. Everhard, how did you become knowledge of these facts that you've just told me? Who related those
My
two?
mother.
Your mother related those?
Because my grandfather had the family Bible in which there was 5 generations written in the family record, and my mother read the Bible many times. Well, then the Bible, when the home burned, the Bible was burned, and so my mother would tell me just what she could remember of the records, you know.
In those days, we all know that there was no such thing as a birth certificate.
No, and a lot of instances there was no such thing as a marriage license. You just went up before the preacher and he said the words and he was married.
Ms. Everhard, how old were you when you really recall having been in the company of Jesse Woodson James?
Oh, I was already married.
I see.
Me and Aubrey went to see him in, let me think, the latter part of 47 or early 48.
What was the occasion for
I
that?
read about him, my mother told me about him in my growing up years. And so I read in the paper where there was a Frank Dalton in the hospital in Dallas. And I told Aubrey, I said, I'm going to see him. That may be my kinfolks. Because, see, I'm kin to the Daltons, too. So Aubrey said, well, get ready. Well, I did, and we was fixing to leave for Dallas. And it hit me. We'd better find out. He might not be there. So Aubrey called Dallas. And come to find out, Jesse had been taken to Centerville, Texas. So we just turned our little Ford car around and went to Centerville. And found him in the hotel there. And went in and spent a Sunday afternoon with him.
How old was he
When
at that
I
time?
walked in, he was 100 years old. He just, yeah, he's 100 years old. When I walked in and walked up and caught hold of the foot of the bed, and I said, Mr. Dalton, I am the granddaughter of James Anderson Underwood and Savannah Elizabeth O'Daniel Underwood. He said, is that a fact? I knew them all. I knew them well. Then he knew who I was, see.
See, now, how old were you then? About approximately.
I was in about 32, I think.
Now, you told me a while ago you was about 71 or 2?
I'll be 71 tomorrow.
71.
Yeah.
All right. Now, after you made your visit there at Centerville, then you left Jesse, and
When we left that day, he said, you'll be back tomorrow. I said, if a tree don't fall on me or something. He said, you just see that it don't. So every Sunday for 4 or 5 Sundays, we made it our business to spend every Sunday afternoon with him. I believe it was 4 Sundays. And Aubrey would take the old Hoke outside and entertain him so me and Uncle Jesse could be by ourselves.
Now, who was this Mr. Hope?
He was a guy that was running errands and picking up mail, and besides that, a lot of other things.
In other words, he was kind of assistant.
He was, see, Uncle Jesse, as I called him, although he's a cousin, a third cousin, and nonetheless, I was raised the old way. You don't call your elders Jim, Joe, and John. You call them Aunt and Uncle, you know. So we called him Uncle. Well, I called him Uncle Frank then because he hadn't come out with his name. But he told me in Centerville what he was going to do. And he said, when I get where I'm going, said, I'm fixing to leave here, and when I get where I'm going, you come to me. I said, I will if I can. He said, you see that you do.
Man Everhard, you said that on several occasions there, about 3 or 4 weeks straight, that on Sunday, the weekend, you and your husband,
Every Sunday.
you went there. Now, I'm assuming that in those visits that you had many, many opportunities to ask him a lot of questions about his family and your family and things that happened in Tennessee and
Sure.
Missouri.
We reminisced back, and he showed me pictures, and he knew that Chief Geronimo real well, and he showed me a picture of him with Chief Geronimo, and we talked about his marshal days when he was a marshal there in the territory. And he told me about talked to me about his mother, and he showed me pictures of his mother. Yeah, we talked about the family.
All right, now, Ms. Everhard, was there ever a time that you had some doubt that you were going to ask him positive questions to make sure that you had the real cousin, and there was all evidence that you never did have to wonder after you left him, well, I wonder if he's
There was
a
never
fake.
a doubt in my mind, because he knew the answers to too many questions.
Now, you also know that all through history, on Jesse James' life and career, that there have been a number of people who were imposters, who went about
That is correct.
and claimed that they were Jesse James.
One of them's name was Williams.
And those imposters led the American people and the people of the world astray.
Well, that's like another thing that's been a foul up in history. There was when Jesse James was supposedly killed.
Yes, well, we'll get to that a little bit, but what I'm trying to do, I want to make sure that in your mind that there was never a doubt of what the man that you befriended, you spent money on.
When he was in my home and they talked with my mother, and they would talk about when she was a girl,
And she was sold on the idea too.
she knew it was him.
I see.
My mother lived to be nearly 90 years old.
All right. Now, Ms. Everhard, let's carry this right on down now. We'll drop back to the early days when he was an outlaw. And we'll get to that. But now, let's continue where you were. After you visited, and after Jesse left Centerville, then I'm assuming that the next time you pick up his acquaintance or letter.
The next time I seen him was in Lawton, Oklahoma.
What was his purpose?
He had come out with his true identity.
Oh.
And when I walked in the motel room where he was, I said, hello, Uncle Jesse.
Now, that was in May of 1948.
May the 19th, 1948.
All right. Can you give us some brief things there?
There was 30,000 people gathered in Lawton to see him that day.
30,000.
30,000.
Did you have a lot of newspaper, radio
Oh, my
coverage?
God, yes. Radio and newspaper, and then they brought a Cadillac out, Cadillac convertible, and put him in a Cadillac and took him downtown where they had a sound truck, and he made a talk downtown.
Did he tell them that he was the real
That is
Jesse
correct.
Woodson James?
That is correct. He told them exactly who he was, that all those others that had passed off like that was imposters, that he knew that they were doing that, but that he was the real Jesse James.
In other words, that he did make a very
He
favorable impression.
He made a talk there, and then from there he went back to the motel, and of course me and Aubrey was behind him when he started downtown. But with 30,000 people all trying to get to see him, they didn't take them long to push me and Aubrey back.
And then I assume after that particular occasion that you and Aubrey probably
We went
left.
back to the motel and visited a little while, and then we
Went
had
back to Austin?
We had to, because Aubrey had to go back to work the next
I
morning.
see. All right, now from there, where do we pick up Jesse
Then
again?
From there he left and he went to, he went to Arizona, and then, let's see, no, he went to, Arizona, and then he went to California, Tennessee, And I don't remember without going back through my material exactly where all, but anyway,
You'd only go.
and I kept up with him best I could by telegram and telephone and letters. And in February of 1949, he come back to our house
They're in Austin, Texas.
Texas, and he was very, very sick with pneumonia. And he only got to stay at home 4 hours. And then I called the ambulance and put him in the hospital.
You put him in the Breckenridge Hospital.
That is right.
In Austin, Texas.
And he stayed there 7 weeks.
And
most of that time under an oxygen tent.
Now, can you tell us?
And I was out there to see him every day from 2 to 5 times a day. I sneaked food into him. I done a little bit of everything.
All right. Now, what did the doctors diagnose his case to be?
Pneumonia.
Pneumonia, and was that related to the injury he had in the Civil War?
And that injury, and that, you know, he had at the close of the war between the states, he was shot in the right lung and under the right lung. And so when he had that pneumonia, that made it harder on him because of that bad lung, see.
Now, Ms. Everhard, you do know that is a fact of the person who, the Union troops, they made that a record that the person that they shot was shot in the side.
In the right lung,
right
and
lung.
under the right lung, and I've got a photo picture to prove it.
That's right. And they knew, or thought they knew, that was the real Jesse James.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, now, after he stayed there all those weeks, you put up the
Then
money?
Then I got a call from the Jesse James Hotel in St. Joe, Missouri, that if I would send Jesse James back to St. Joe, Missouri, they would prove him to be a fake in 2 weeks. I said, I'll go talk to him. So I went out to the hospital, and I told him about the call. He said, you go back and tell them I would be glad for them to prove me to be a fake. And that if I will gladly come back to St. Joe, but only by plane. So I contacted Frank Hall, who lived in Lawton and worked for the Lawton Constitution newspaper. He's the one that broke the story, Frank Hall and Lindsay Quitten. I contacted Frank, and Frank arranged for a private plane. And while he was doing that, I typed out a letter for Uncle Jesse under his instructions. I didn't, Aubrey did. And Uncle Jesse signed it, and we sent the letter to the hotel that he would be glad to come back. Then Frank got the plane down to Austin. I went out and took Uncle Jesse out of the hospital, took him to the airport by ambulance, put him on the private plane, and he flew to St. Joe. 6 weeks later, I still hadn't got any, it is or it ain't out of them. They wouldn't say it was. They wouldn't say it wasn't.
Now, you and I have read...
They wouldn't say.
That trial was held in Union City.
No, that's a different time.
Oh, different time.
Uh-huh. So then in 1949, when he went on over to Merrimack from the St. Joe Hotel, the Jesse James Hotel in St. Joe, he went to Merrimack.
Caverns.
And he stayed there at Merrimack Caverns until September of 1950. And while he was at the Merrimack Caverns, he told the owner, who was Lester B. Dill, about an outlet in that cavern that nobody knew about. Jesse and them used to use it as a hideout, but there was an entrance to that cavern, and they knew an outlet.
They kept a lot of supplies there.
That is right. But Lester Dill didn't know it and didn't believe it, so he hired some men and they went around and found that opening. Well, in 1950 then, September 50, Uncle Jesse come back to our house. And he was at home about 3 weeks, I think. And then his hip that had been broken got to bothering him so bad, and he had to be put back in the hospital. So from 2 to 5 times a day, I was out there with him.
And you helped him in every way you could,
Every way I could.
financially and otherwise.
When he lost his eyesight, I said, oh, well, I've got eyes, we'll just use mine. I read to him, I wrote for him, I handled all of his mail, read all of his letters to him, and seen that he had tobacco in his tobacco pouch because he chewed this old-time Tennessee twist tobacco.
All right, and then after he leaves the hospital, then did he go down on the Texas coast somewhere?
Yeah, with this stupid idiot called Hoke.
Yeah, and that was his agent.
Yeah, and then he wound up eventually by 51, in August of 51, he was at Granbury. He was only there about, well, a very short time.
That's Granbury, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And he died there.
And that's where he died on the 15th day of August, 1951.
That's right. And he's
And
buried.
we went to the funeral, me and Aubrey. We drove down to Granbury and was there for the funeral.
And here a few years ago, I understand you went to a lot of expense of having a beautiful...
$467 monument set in his grave.
Well, that's what really convinced me. I knew that nobody would have spent money like that unless it was the truth.
$467 for that monument. And I put the wording on there, supposedly killed in 1882, because he was supposedly killed then, but he died a natural death in 1951.
Now, Ms. Everhard, you've done a good job of starting at one point and going right on to the day he died. Now, we want to take a little break, and then we come back, and we want to pick up where we think is most important. We got the history books, there are many books written about Jesse up to the time of the alleged killing.
Yeah.
And so we'll take
talk
a break.
about that prior to and
That's
during
right.
the killing of Old Bigelow. Yeah.
That's right. So we'll take this break, and then we'll come back. We'll pick up there so that we can pull this thing together.
Okay.
Thank you. Ready to start, to continue our story of the real story of the life of Jesse James as interpreted by his third cousin, Mrs. Ola Everhard. Mrs. Everhard, now you have given us a detailed account of your acquaintance with your cousin from about 1948 or 9 to his death. Is that right?
47 or 8, yeah.
All right. Now what we'd like to do is to get you to focus your memories back to 1880. We're now in the state of Missouri, and Jesse and his gang running through the country, making the raids, and they were not the only ones, I'm sure.
And that was in his outlaw days.
That's in his outlaw days.
Yeah, him and Frank in their outlaw days.
That's Frank James, his brother.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and one thing that comes to my mind in his outlaw days, I believe it was 1866 was when he got shot, and Uncle Jesse got shot in his left shoulder. And he made his way somewhere or other to Wild Henry Roberts' place in Texas. Wild Henry had one son, whose real name was William Henry, but he was known as Billy the Kid, was 7 years old.
You mean now Billy the Kid,
Billy the Kid.
the wild outlaw
That
of
is
New Mexico.
That is correct.
And it was his daddy that Jesse fought with in the war.
That's right. They were Quantrill men together.
All right. Now, let's...
So then after the war was over, and Uncle Jesse was shot, and he made his way there, and he stayed there with the Roberts till he got able to travel again. Billy the kid was 7 years old at the time. Well, then of course, they were friends. Billy and Uncle Jesse were friends. The rest of Billy's life, Billy died before Uncle Jesse did.
He died a natural death, or was he shot?
He had a heart attack.
I see.
Billy had a heart attack. Contrary to what's been written, Billy lived to be 91 years old and died of a heart attack. And in Hyco, Texas.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Jesse didn't die till 1951. But we'll go back to Missouri, as you said. In 81, Governor Thomas T. Crittenden was later, it was just Thomas T. then. He was running for governor of the state of Missouri. Well, the Crittendens and the Jameses had known one another in Kentucky before they moved to Missouri. But Crittenden's platform for running for the governor was that if elected, he would rid the state of Missouri of outlawry, which Uncle Jesse thought was a marvelous idea. So he contributed $35,000 to the Crittenden campaign. Well, then in 82, Jesse was in St. Joe. Crittenden was governor of the state of Missouri.
He had won the election.
He had won the election, and Bigelow was doing all sorts of things and claiming he was Jesse James.
Now, who was this Bigelow?
Bigelow was a Quantrill man first, and then he was, he was with Quantrill first, and then after that, he was a small-time outlaw with the Slade gang, S-L-A-D-E, Slade.
He was another leader of a group of men.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if he was the leader or not, but he was a member of the Slade gang. So he was, every time he'd pull a robbery, he'd say, "I'm Jesse James." And of course, although Jesse James was an outlaw, he didn't take too kindly to that, you know. So one night, the night of April the 2nd, 1882, Jesse James and Governor Thomas T. Crittenden had a secret meeting behind the house on Lafayette Street in St. Joseph, Missouri.
Now, this was the home that Jesse was living in.
Jesse had rented the house, but he'd let Bigelow come there and live in it. Charlie Bigelow, and bring his wife and 2 children. And Jesse never lived there. And all this stuff about Jesse standing in a chair and getting shot is malarkey. Those were low ceilings, and Jesse said I could stand on my tiptoes, reach up and touch the ceiling. Why would I stand on a chair?
Now, at that meeting that night, what do you suppose that Jesse and the governor were talking about?
Well, it stands to reason that what took place from then on, the governor was in on the hoax.
All right, now, I understand that the slave that did the cooking and looked after Jesse during the time he was roaming over the country, he was in the stall behind the house currying the horses.
Well, see, now, that was the next morning, April the 3rd.
Yeah, and he witnessed the meeting between Governor Thomas Crittenden and Jesse Woodson.
Well, I don't know about Nigger John, but I do know that Colonel James R. Davis was there to make sure that there was no interference while the governor and Uncle Jesse had their meeting.
Now, Ms.
Colonel
Everhard,
Davis sat right there to ride interference.
tell us now, about the actual happening of the shooting of Charles Bigelow, the whole plot there.
Well, the way that Uncle Jesse told me, he was out in the stable, him and Nigger John. Charlie Ford and Bob Ford,
His cousin.
who in truth and fact was first cousins of Jesse James, they was in the house. And Bob shot and killed Charlie Bigelow. And Uncle Jesse told me, he said, when I heard the shot, I knew it wasn't a firecracker. So I went in, I run in the house, and there was old Bigelow laying there dead as a mackerel. So he said to Bob, Bob, looked like you killed him. Bob Ford said, looked like I did, Jess. Uncle Jesse said, well, you just tell him it's me, I'm gone. So then Bob went outside and said, I just killed Jesse James. So the people for miles around come to see, for blocks around, come to see the body of Jesse James, because nobody, there was no adult pictures of the James boys.
In other words, the people in St.
They
Joseph,
didn't know what he looked like.
he was a mystery man to them.
That's right. They had no idea what Jesse James looked like. He was all around there during that time, and Frank was around there, and when they got old Bigelow, took him to the Sidon Fadden Funeral Home in St. Joe, and when they got old Bigelow finally in the coffin, Frank went in there with 2 Quantrill men with him, and Frank looked like the best looking undertaker I ever seen. They didn't know what he looked like, and he stood there for 15 or 20 minutes and looked at old Bigelow, but there was nobody in town knew what he looked like, see. And Jesse and Frank was all downtown listening to the people talk, the reaction of the people from the killing of Jesse James. And when they called for identifiers, among the identifiers was none other than Wild Henry Roberts, father of Billy the Kid. He had come there and was among the identifiers to identify Charlie Bigelow as being Jesse James.
Well, now, didn't Jesse's mother, did they make a deal to get her to come in?
She come in there, they sent a telegram to her.
Where was she?
She was at Kearney on the farm. So they sent a telegram to her, and as soon as she got the telegram, she caught the train and went to St. Joe. She walked in and looked at the dead body and said, no, gentlemen, that's not my son.
She was emphatic. That is not my son,
Very
Jesse.
direct. Colonel Davis took her out in the other room and talked to her and said, claim this is Jesse to give him a chance to live a better life.
This is his only way to escape.
So she said, all right. So she went back in there, and Uncle Jesse said she was a good actress. She went, she went back in there and said, let me look at him again. She looked at Bigelow, broke down, went to crying, and said, oh, that is my son. But when she come out of the room, she looked over at Colonel Davis and winked. She was as dry-eyed as they come. But she went right on through, and they buried Bigelow in her front yard in a grave 8 feet deep instead of the usual 6. And she planted flowers on the grave so in case the grave was ever bothered, it would have to have the flowers.
Ms. Everhard, now, when the inquest was held, the sheriff, I believe his name was Timberlake,
Yeah.
He called the person that he thought was Jesse's wife, but it was not.
That was Bigelow's wife.
Bigelow's wife. Where was Jesse's wife at this time?
In Nashville, Tennessee, visiting friends.
Visiting friends. Do you
And
recall?
the pictures that people see nowadays of the supposed Jesse James children, that is not his children.
There was Bigelow.
That was the Bigelow kid.
All right. Now, you remember what Jesse told you about what the inquest was about? He had her there. He wanted her to identify the body.
She said, I'm Mrs. Jesse James. She
Oh.
claimed to be Mrs. Jesse James. When she said the dead man's my husband, she is telling the truth. But when she said the dead man was that her name was Mrs. Jesse James, and the dead man was Jesse James, that was wrong.
All right, but did he ask?
That was prearranged.
Or what about when he was questioning her, how long have you been married? And she said 7 years to Jesse.
Well, and then they asked her in the inquest, did your husband have a part of one of his fingers?
The index finger.
And she said yes, and they said, which finger? She said, I don't know. She'd only been married to him 7 years, and she didn't know.
She didn't know. So that kind of goes right there.
It's ironic that a woman could be with a man 7 years and not know which one of his fingers had part of it missing. But that's the way it was.
Now, we'll move right along. Of course, the body was taken by train the next day or so.
It was taken on the night of the 5th. She was killed, Bigelow was killed on April the 3rd.
Now, was that at night or early in the morning?
About 9 o'clock in the morning. 8:30 or 9.
They moved the body then to Kearney.
So then the body had to be taken to Sidon Fadden Funeral Home and identified and all that stuff. And then they had it where they could take it back to Kearney by the 5th. So late in the evening on April the 5th, 1882, they had Bigelow in a coffin, and the coffin in a pine box, and they put him on the train. And on the train with his body was not only Sheriff Timberlake and some other laws, but in the coach was Bigelow's wife and 2 kids and Aunt Zerelda. See? Well, they went to Kearney, Missouri.
Now you said Aunt Zerelda, pardon me. When you mean the mother of Jesse's real mother. Okay.
Well, she was mine.
Yeah, that's true. But I just thought for the
I'm glad
for the history we want to identify each and every one.
Yeah. So then the funeral was held on the 6th. When they got the body, in the wee hours of the morning, they got the body to Kearney. Took it to the Kearney house, which was a sort of a hotel. And it stayed there till time to take it to the church in the afternoon. And the body was taken to the Baptist church.
He belonged to the Baptist faith.
Where Jesse had been a member until he went into Outlaw and then he dropped out of the church. Had his name took off the record. So then when the funeral was about to start, of course the church was full of people. The church only held 300 people, but there was over 500 people in the church. The seats was full and the people were standing.
It was just a little country village, wasn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the yard was full. Well, there was, as the usual, 6 pallbearers, but only 5 walked up there nonchalantly to take care of their places at the casket. Then an unknown pallbearer stepped up to the head of the coffin, and it was he who instructed all the others what to do.
Now, who was this man?
And that unknown, unrecognized, nobody knew him and couldn't imagine who he was or where he came from. That was none other than the real Jesse James.
Why do you suppose that his mother wanted the body buried in her front yard rather than taking to the regular community cemetery?
To keep her
Arizona to Mesilla, which is now Las Cruces, that he met Jesse there under an alias name.
That is correct.
Do you feel free to tell us who that name or what that name was? Didn't make that.
I can't. I believe it was Jim McDaniel.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
All right, and then didn't Billy also in his testimony about a year before he died say that Jesse and Belle Starr had been visiting out in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and Fort
Well,
Sumter?
and Jesse was there a lot of times, and Billy too, there at Las Vegas, New Mexico, because that used to be quite a gambling center.
That's right. That's right. He stayed.
And Uncle Jesse had an illness of playing poker, you know. That was his main hobby.
Didn't Frank go up into west of Amarillo and become a Texas Ranger at Tascosa,
That is
Texas?
correct. He sure did.
Well, when did he go there?
And, well, can't remember the year.
1884, I think.
Might be. I can't.
See, he was defeated in New Mexico as a sheriff,
Yeah.
and he went over there to clean up the cattle rustling.
And the man that was supposed to have killed Billy the Kid was right up there and knew Frank James and seen him, was with him. And then me and you both got pictures of them
Oh yes,
together.
Frank James and Pat Garrett are together in a picture made in 1886 at Tascosa, and both of them were in the Texas Ranger.
And you know, Garrett had a daughter, and she was blind, and she was a piano teacher
At Roswell.
at Roswell. And I've got this friend at Victoria, Texas, that's way up in her 80s now. She knew Billy, Pat Garrett's daughter, and they were talking one day, this friend of mine and Pat Garrett's daughter. And Pat Garrett's daughter said, my daddy never killed Billy the Kid, they were friends.
He bought him his first pair of boots, I understand.
And that, she wrote that to me, and I've got it in a letter, written in her own handwriting. So, Uncle Jesse told me that that was not Billy in that grave over there.
Miss Everhard, how did Billy come out to the surface? How did he come out and tell people who he was? How did that come about?
That is after Uncle Jesse come out with his true identity.
Well, who was the man that did
And
that?
Billy wanted people to know who he actually was. It was kind of pitiful. He got tired of going by alias names too, I guess. And so he wrote to Uncle Jesse about this William V. Morrison. William V. Morrison, who lived, I believe, in St. Louis at that particular time. And he was not only an attorney at law, but he was a member of the Genealogical Society
Of Missouri.
of the state of Missouri. And so Billy began to talk to him about getting a pardon for him. And
Who did he want to get a pardon from?
the governor of the state of New Mexico.
That was Thomas Mabry,
Yeah,
1950.
yeah. So I kept in touch. See, I wrote to Billy all the time, and I kept in touch with him all the time that was going on. And I remember when he come up here, Morrison wrote to me, and so did Billy. And I knew when that was going on. But when Billy got up to New Mexico, they seen a lot of people that knew Billy in Old Mexico. They went over into Old Mexico to Juarez. They went to El Paso, and Morrison and Billy went over to Juarez and met some people over there he knew. And they met people other places. But when they got to the capital, Billy got scared. And
What
he got
scared him?
nervous because he had been in so much through his years, and he had a lot of years on his head and a heart condition too. And so he just got sick. And they wouldn't give him a pardon. They turned him down.
Did the governor keep faith with him about They're supposed to have a private conference, but
No, but the governor didn't. He didn't.
what did the governor
He
Major
had a
do
whole bunch of people in there, and that's what scared Billy.
in his office?
Now, he was supposed to met privately with Morrison and Billy. But he lied to Billy. He didn't keep his word. The truth didn't mean a thing to him. He just had a whole bunch of people in there. And I can appreciate how Billy would feel walking in there. He didn't know what they was liable to do.
What did Morrison and Billy do when the governor said, "I'll have no part of this"?
I believe they just, the best I can remember, it's been a long time ago now, and I've been working on other things, but I think they just loaded up and left out there.
Well, Billy had a light heart attack, you remember?
So then Billy come on back to Hyco, and in December,
About 3 weeks later.
in December I got Billy and DeWitt Travis and Billy's wife Lizzie. They was all preparing to come spend the weekend with me and Mama and Aubrey. And so we was expecting them when I heard on the news that Billy had wrote me a letter and had gone downtown to mail it.
At Hyco.
At Hyco, Texas, and when he got in front of the newspaper office there, he dropped dead of a heart attack. Now, whatever become of the letter that he wrote to me is anybody's guess. But he died. He died just, that was on about Thursday, I think, and they were supposed to have been at our house on Saturday.
That was December, about
He died on the 31st.
That's right, last of the...
So that must have been the 29th when he mailed that letter.
Could have been. Well, how did, who told you actually about Billy dying? Did you get a call?
I heard it on the news.
You heard it news. Well, when did you tell
and
Jesse?
Then Lizzie
His wife.
wrote me, and then Morrison wrote me, and I'm the one that had to go out to the hospital and break the news to Uncle Jesse. And that, nobody likes to deliver that kind of news. But when I told Uncle Jesse about Billy dying, Uncle Jesse said, well, I lost a mighty good friend, and the tears just rolled down his face.
He really cried.
He sure did. Yeah, that was pretty, that's not easy to stand by and see a thing like that, you know. You're so helpless, you can't do anything, you know.
How far is Billy buried from Jesse's grave?
Not very far. They're pretty close together.
About 30 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And Billy's buried there at Hamilton.
at Hamilton, Texas.
And Jesse's buried at Granbury.
That's right.
That's not very far apart.
No, about 25 miles.
Billy died in December of 50, and Jesse died in August of 51. That was a difference in their death.
Billy Everhard, do you recall some of the letters you received from people who identified Billy the Kid as the real one? There was one fellow from up in Indiana that had been his buddy. They fought together over in the Ozark Mountains up in Oklahoma and southern part of Missouri.
I've got several letters here, but I don't remember the number, the amount of them, you know.
Well, could you tell us something that they said that you knew that they knew what they were talking about?
Honestly, right now, I don't remember. It's been, you know, if you don't read back on them every once in a while.
Well, maybe I can refresh your mind. You sent me a copy, a Xerox copy of a letter that you got in response to a letter that you had written to Ozark Jack, which
Ozark
was,
Jack Burlington.
That's right.
Petersburg, Indiana.
That's right. That you were telling him about Jesse, and he was so grateful to you. He wrote you about a 5-page letter, and in that he said time and again about Jesse and so on, and about him meeting him last time was at the Merrimack Caverns.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, Ozark Jack was he was with Jesse too at Tascosa, and Billy the Kid was there.
That's right.
And there was 2 men come in the saloon, the old Blue Goose Saloon at Tascosa.
right.
A rough and tumble place. No telling how many men's buried under that building.
right.
But anyhow, nice cheerful thought, isn't it? Well, anyhow, uh, Billy was there, and Ozark was there, and Jesse was there, and these two men come in, and one of them got shooting. Billy, he laid down on the floor and played dead. Ozark Jack, he went out the door, and he got shot as he went out. And he staggered on out in the yard, and when the bullets stopped flying, Al Jennings was there too, him and his gang. When the bullets stopped flying, Billy looked up and seen that the man with the gun was gone. So he run outside to see about Ozark. Well, there was Ozark laying there shot, bleeding, and begging for water. So Billy the Kid went over to the windmill, which was a little ways from the saloon, and he got some water in his hat and brought it back and give Ozark Jack a drink out of his hat. And then after that he laughed and tell Ozark, "You owe me your life. I saved your life. Brought you a drink of water."
Well, there's another very important letter. You sent me a copy of it. I'd like to refresh your mind. It was from Frank James' daughter. She wrote a letter to you and asking about Jesse and so on while you were living in Austin.
When I lived there, lived there in Austin. Her name was Mary Plana. James, Frank's daughter, and she married Charles Norris.
Now, where were they living then?
And they lived at Claremore, Oklahoma. Yeah. And so she wrote me, she heard that Uncle Jesse was there at home with us. So she wrote me and said, "I'm so glad to hear that you're related and that you got Uncle Jesse with you." And she told me then, after telling me about her own health, see, she is up in her 80s. She said, "I wish I could come down to Austin and cook Uncle Jesse some chicken and dumplings because that's one of his favorite foods. I am the only daughter, legitimate daughter, that Frank James had. All others that claims to be his daughter, they're illegitimate." That's her wording.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought that was a dignified way of putting it.
That's right. After Billy and Jesse, they would meet each other and over a period of years there, and then they both settled together with DeWitt Travis at Gladewater, Texas. And don't you recall, DeWitt said in one of his letters that I took Billy the Kid to Dr. Cruz.
Well, see, Billy had, as you know, and everybody that's ever seen a picture of Billy, in the main picture everybody goes by, Billy had some tush teeth up here, and it made his mouth out of shape and his face out of shape. So Uncle Jesse and DeWitt encouraged him to go to Dr. Cruz and have those tush teeth extracted.
That was 1932.
Yeah. And Billy was in 36, I believe it was. Uncle Jesse broke his leg. Billy and his wife was living at at Hyco.
Hyco?
And Uncle Jesse, when he come out of the hospital from that broken leg, he went out and stayed a while with
Well, didn't he live in
35.
Overton?
That's,
Wasn't he in Hallfield? At Overton?
oh, Uncle Jesse was. Billy wasn't with him, but Uncle Jesse. Billy was living in Hyco.
Uncle Jesse broke his leg in East Texas.
Well, he was living in a hotel when he broke his leg, but he didn't go back and live there because he had to live by himself. And Uncle,
But I mean, Billy lived in East Texas.
yeah, he
At
did.
Overton.
Yeah,
Now, as I recall, Billy got a job over there. It was during the Depression. Even though it was oil boom days in East Texas, there was a depression. And Billy was too old, and Jesse was too old to work. And poor DeWitt he had plenty of money, and he just took them over as
He kept them going.
he kept them going.
Uncle Jesse made a little extra money because I'll tell you how he done it. He wrote short stories and sold them.
Yeah.
Argosy magazine.
He wrote for Argosy, he wrote for different newspapers, and he'd make a little money along selling a short story. He wrote about the Civil War, you know.
Now we
He never
have.
did write about the James boys, and because it's like he told me one time. I asked him. I said, you hail from Missouri, and I thought I'd read you this book about the James boys. Thought maybe you knew them. He said, well, honey, I've been out to their place, but every time I went, they was always gone.
Now, back with the connection between Billy and Jesse, it's known fact that Jesse did visit in and around Fort Worth, Hyco, Carlton,
Oh, very much.
and
so.
Frank did too, because Frank lived up at Wichita Falls.
And Frank lived at Fort Worth.
He lived at Fort Worth.
And he worked 4 years for Sanger Brothers
In
at
Dallas.
Fort Worth.
It's a
I
big
mean,
department.
Dallas.
Yeah.
And he lived, him and Annie, that was his second wife's name, Annie, she was Annie Ralston.
Right.
Him and Annie lived at Dallas. And Frank was the floor walker at Sanger Brothers for 4 consecutive years.
That's
And when Uncle Jesse come back from the Spanish-American War, Frank was working out there at Sanger Brothers.
now. Isn't it a fact that everybody in Wichita Falls, you bring up the name, the Palmers, Frank and Jesse, they all say, well, they lived here, and Jesse came here, and Jesse even came to his sister's funeral
That is
in
correct.
1889.
That's right.
That's right, and they're buried in the prominent cemetery
That
there.
is right. And got nice tombstones.
That's right. We got pictures of them,
Yeah.
and so now in your mind, we've established pretty definitely from what you've said. There's no question in your mind of what you know that J. Frank Dalton was the honest one and only Frank Dalton. You also
J. Frank Dalton and Jesse James was one and the same person.
even though he did have.
That is exactly right. James McDaniel is the name. He was a legislator under. James McDaniel. Then when he was elected, he had a different name.
Well, now you heard the tapes. You remember a while back, a year or so ago,
Maury's tape.
Maury Davidson, who is now retired, he was an NBC radio announcer in New York, and he had Jesse and Billy on a program up there on that famous program called We the People on January the 13th,
Uncle Jesse called me from New York, from the hotel room, and I talked about 30 minutes to him when he was laying on a bed in a hotel room in New York just before he went on that program.
And you've heard those tapes.
Yes, and then when Maury come here in 82, I think it was.
82, 83, he
I
came
think
right in
it's
this
80
room.
Well, it's 82 because my brother was still living.
Okay.
And, yeah, it was 82. And Maury brought a tape, and I heard them tapes, and that was done of the birthday party, Uncle Jesse's 102nd
Chair.
birthday party.
Is on no chair?
See, Uncle Jesse was on the 5th day of September, 1949. Uncle Jesse was 102 years old. And they had a wing-dinging birthday party for him. And among those present was DeWitt Travis, Colonel James R. Davis, Nigger John Trammell, and
Ozark.
no, I don't believe
Yes, he was there.
Yes, he was there.
Yeah, Ozark
He's
was
in the
there.
picture.
And Billy.
And Mary James Norris was there, because
Billy?
I got her picture with Ozark Jack. She was
Billy?
there. And Billy was there.
Ms. Everhard, now, you've covered this very well, and you've done an excellent job. And the next question I want to ask you this. You held all this material for over, well, from 1950 to 1982.
Correction.
When you
from 1947, I
Before-
began. From 47 on, I've had a lot of material.
well, in other words, you've had it longer. you've had all these years, and you have tried your best to get some recognition from Missouri.
I wanted people to see the truth and accept the truth.
What kind of response did you get from people in Missouri about Jesse?
Well, they wouldn't even answer me, wouldn't even give me a reply.
Well, how did they treat you at Lawton when you was up there and you had 30,000 people there and the newspaper and the radios was blaring?
None of them made any comment except I happened to be, see, before they took Uncle Jesse out of the motel room and put him in a Cadillac convertible to take him downtown, they had a psychiatrist go in to him. I don't know who had that brainstorm, but somebody decided they'd have a psychiatrist come in there. I guess it was because he was 100 years old.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Anyway, me and Aubrey was standing just real close to the door when this psychiatrist come out the door after examining Uncle Jesse. And he said, "My God, there ain't a thing wrong with that man's mind." Said, "Well, he's got the mind of a 35-year-old man. He's smarter than I am."
So he wasn't senile.
He was not senile at all. And me and Aubrey happened to be in the motel talking to Uncle Jesse when this fella from, well, later from Chicago, but he used to be the detective in St. Louis, John Shevlin, when he come to see Uncle Jesse. See, in 1901 or 2, I can't remember exactly which, but 1901 or 1902, Shevlin was in Arkansas, Hot Springs, Arkansas. And Jesse went to Hot Springs and he run a shooting gallery there. And Shevlin was the one that issued him the license to operate the shooting gallery. And Shevlin had seen an old white-haired man before that was taking tickets at a theater in St. Louis in about 83, somewhere along there, 84. But he never paid any attention to him. And then another time, Shevlin had been sent out to catch the pickpockets that was following a show, a road show that was displaying. It was Cole Younger and Frank James. They had a bunch of Jesse James's clothes and boots and guns, and they had a road show made up, and they was traveling around showing people. Well, the man that was taking the tickets and selling the tickets was none other than Jesse James. And Shevlin had seen him there, and me and Aubrey seen Shevlin when he come in Lawton there at the motel. And instead of Uncle Jesse saying, "Hello, Mr. Shevlin," he just looked up at Shevlin and said, "Well, John, you shaved your mustache off, didn't you?" And that like to cause Shevlin to faint. He knew then that was the same man that had run the shooting gallery in Arkansas.
Another point, all these years you've tried your best to tell what you've told us here today, and you got no cooperation from historians up in Missouri.
Oh, no.
And everybody...
Texas either.
That's right. And they tried their best to just make you out as a total feeble-minded lady.
Yeah, senile.
Yeah. Now, how can you account for all the records and everything up in Missouri being destroyed, even as late as 1950?
Well, you know, I've thought a lot about that. And maybe it's the fact that when Uncle Jesse was preparing to come out with his name, which he promised his mother he'd do it when he got to be 100, maybe he had friends that helped him to sort of get rid of some records, or maybe they never was there. I don't really know. I do know one thing, that the coroner refused to sign a death certificate for Charlie Bigelow.
To this day, you have a letter, because you sent me a copy, that the...
I've got that on legal form letter out of the
so there's bound to been some doubt, or it would have been filed.
That's right.
And all the
They
newspapers have been destroyed.
refused, and you can't find, I've got some stuff that I copied out of the 1882 newspapers, but they are not in existence anymore, those 1882 newspapers.
Now here's another startling.
Now, Frank Hall's wife, she brought him to my house, and she stayed a week with us, and while she was there, and her and Mama was talking, well, I copied down a lot of stuff out of that paper, you know, because she had to take the papers back. See, Frank was with the Lawton Constitution newspaper in Lawton. He's the one that broke the story, you know. And, he used to call me at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning from the Lawton Constitution newspaper.
Ms. Everhard, it is a fact that you have entertained NBC, Associated Press, UPI people here, and your story, part of it, as you've told us today, has been given to the American people from coast to coast.
All over the United States, Hawaii, Canada, and about a month ago I found out that it's still going in Canada. Because a girl that wrote to me from there, whose last name is Wall, she sent me my picture she cut out of the paper. There, see.
Shoot.
Now about Billy.
Back in 1939, you know, Uncle Jesse was he was a whiz with a handgun. Any kind of gun, as a matter of fact, but particularly with pistols. So they were, in 1939 in Corpus Christi, Texas, they was having a political doings down there, and for entertainment they decided to have a shooting match. Well, the sheriff he was a master, he was the champ, you know. So they barred him from entering the shooting match, and they barred Uncle Jesse from entering the shooting match. He was the MC, but they wouldn't let him enter the shooting match. But him and the sheriff decided they would do a little exhibition shooting after the shooting match was over. So one of the things that Uncle Jesse done, he got a tin can, just any ordinary tin can, got somebody to throw it up in the air. Now, in 1939, Uncle Jesse had a lot of years on his head. Remember that? They threw that can up in the air, and he took a 6-shooter in each hand, and he kept that can in the air till both guns was empty.
Same thing in East Texas.
And he done the same thing in another exhibition in East Texas. He done the same thing in Canada, at a place there.
Got newspaper write-ups.
Uh-huh.
Now, Uncle Jesse has told you many times that Billy, he felt sorry for Billy, because Billy did not know how to read very well, and very little.
He said he was very poorly educated, poor little fellow. That's the way he always put it.
Now, you know, some of our critics and history writers, they say that in all probability that Billy Kid read all this, and then when Morrison took him on the trip to backtrack all the places that he went in the state of New Mexico to see if he was really telling the truth or knew what the truth was.
But he never found him wrong one time.
No, sir,
No.
you remember Mr. Morrison, before he died of a heart attack, you remember, in 77.
Yeah.
He said wherever my car went, he would tell me ahead of time, 10, 12 minutes ahead of time, what we'd see.
Billy didn't have any education, but he had a fantastic memory.
That's right. And
Uncle Jesse had a fantastic memory.
and we both believe, beyond any shadow of doubt, all this baloney that has been in our history books, Billy was not a murderer. He killed only about 3 or 4, and those people...
If it was a matter of his life or theirs.
That's right.
Well, I think anybody would turn, if you want to call that a murderer, I might do that if I thought somebody was going to shoot me. I'm believing self-preservation.
And you
better believe it.
From all that you've heard from Jesse and all the 6 years of research I've done, I've talked to those great-grandchildren of the times that was up there in Lincoln County. I've talked to them personally. Some of them wouldn't talk to me unless they had their lawyer present in the room. And every one of them told me this: you will never find anywhere where Billy ever robbed a stagecoach, or attacked a woman, or robbed a bank. And the only people that he came in contact were those who killed his boss there at
Oh, if you if you hurt somebody that was dear to him, he was going to retaliate. Now, you can bet on that. Or if it meant saving his life. Well, I don't consider that a murderer.
No. And I think that's one thing, what you said, my research, that we have proven beyond any question of doubt.
I have no doubt in my mind, Bill, that William Henry Roberts, better known to some people as Brushy Bill, was none other than the real Billy the Kid.
That's right.
Nor do I have any doubt, nor have I ever had any doubt, that J. Frank Dalton and all them other alias names by which he went was none other than the real Jesse James, the Outlaw.
Ms. Everhard, we appreciate your attitude and what you've said, and I think that...
And those that hollers that it wasn't, how can they say that when they didn't even know him? I did.
Right.
And I was taught not to call my ancestors liars.
And I've said, and I've told you, nobody would put up an imposter and spend the money and the time and work as you have, when you could use the money for other things.
You bet.
Unless it's true.
If I hadn't have loved Uncle Jesse, because that's my cousin, and he done a lot of bad things.
You didn't love what he did,
He done a lot of good things too. While he done some bad things, he done enough good ones to offset it.
And that all started when he was 14 years old, and they was trying to hang him by the neck.
But when you go back, if people would just take the trouble to go back and think back, when one of the first blows, Jesse's father deserted him before Jesse was even 2 years old.
What did his father do?
Got the gold field and took off for the gold fields of California, never to return. Then, before the war between the states started, there was all that trouble with the Jayhawkers and the Redlegs.
Now, who are they?
That's the Kansas Jayhawkers and the Redlegs that was renegades that would come over into Missouri, and they would rob people, burn their barns, steal the horses, steal the cattle, rape the women. And that caused a lot of trouble for Missouri is a divided state. Half of it is the north and half the south. And that's where the Mason-Dixon line goes through there. And they'd come over on that southern side and they'd persecute those people. Well, the Missourians, they got a belly full of that, and they went over and done a little retaliating. But they didn't bother the women folks and the children, you know. And then when you stop and think about it, when Uncle Jesse come back from the war, well, before he went to the war between the states, well, they hung him, they beat him, they put his mother in jail, and his little brother, and his little half-brother, and his little half-sisters.
How old was he then?
He was, well, let's see, he is in the war when it took his mother and the family. He was 15 or 16, about 16 years old. But they beat the blood out of him when he was 14. He run to the house from the field with blood running down his back. And then they come out there and put a rope around his neck and pulled him half running to the barn and threw the rope up over the hay lift and pulled him up. And then they rode off, and his mother run out there and cut the rope and got him down and got him in the house. And he told me, he said, that happened like this morning. And it was like late tomorrow evening before I realized how close to death I came. He died at the age of 100 and almost 104 with rope burn scars still on his neck.
Didn't the nurses at the Breckenridge Hospital, Austin, Texas, ask you where did he get all that scar tissue around his neck?
That's right. But I didn't give him an answer. I just let him. I was afraid they would mistreat him when I wasn't around, you know. So I was a little cautious about what
Right, well, you had reasons to.
You know. And then after the war between the states, Frank and Jesse wanted to come back home and live quiet, normal lives. But see, they were with Quantrill. Quantrill was a guerrilla group. And public sentiment would not allow them to come back home.
That's true.
See,
There was a bounty on their head.
that's right.
Now, isn't it true that Jesse told you that Quantrill, after the war was over, he and his family moved into Texas and settled nearer
Well, a bunch
Waco?
of these wild-eyed writers, Bill, they put it down that Quantrill was killed in Kentucky. Well, that ain't exactly the way it was. His wife was in Kentucky, and the Quantrill's men was in Kentucky. And there was some, the Yankee soldiers was across a creek there. And Quantrill's men was on this side. So Quantrill told one of his men, go up on that hill and look over there and see what you can see. So the boy said, all right, and Quantrill said, take my horse. So this boy got on Quantrill's horse and rode up there, and when he got up there, they shot him from the other side and killed him. Well, when they run up there and investigated the saddlebags on the horse, there was all of Quantrill's papers in the saddlebags, see?
That's the way they put the label on him.
That's right, and word flew like wildfire. We've killed Quantrill. Well, Quantrill went and got his wife and his little girl and come to Texas.
Where did he settle in Texas?
And he settled at, now if I can think of it,
Osceola.
Osceola, Texas, a little bitty place.
Where is
And
it
he
located?
went back to teaching school because originally,
Where's it located?
I can't think,
On Hillsborough.
close to Hillsborough,
Right,
Texas.
17 miles.
Yeah. And he went back to teaching school there, and people at Osceola, they never dreamed that soft-spoken, kind man had once been the fierce Quantrill that got together the most fiercest band of guerrillas that the Civil War produced. But he did.
And Jesse told you that was the little town, Osceola, where he settled and raised a family.
Well, Jesse and Frank and Ozark Jack and lots of the Quantrill men visited him there.
Yeah.
They went there to see him many times.
And what was his real name that he went by there?
Charles Hart.
Charles P. Hart, Jr.
Yeah. He had been educated in a military academy in Kentucky. Charles Hart had. But when the war between the states started and they wanted him to pledge his allegiance to the North, and his brother was in the Confederate Army and he was a Southerner. And he said he wanted to stay neutral. He didn't want to make any comment either way. He wanted to go on teaching. Well, when they told him he couldn't, then they come back and they took him out on the street and they beat him unmerciful. And when he got over that, his temper was so high that he just quit teaching school and he put together the Quantrill's guerrilla raiders. He dropped the name Hart and took the name William Clark Quantrill, C-L-A-R-K-E, William Clark Quantrill. And that it stayed with him until he come back to Texas, and he dropped the name Quantrill and picked up the name Hart. Him and his wife had one little girl. She married
In the city.
That is correct.
All right. Then then the authorities there, I assume that was Sheriff Timberlake. Today it'd probably be the district attorney and the sheriff.
Yeah.
They refused to send the body.
Yeah.
Then the next day, they got another telegram from the governor's office, Governor Crittenden, stating to get all of his belongings, his furniture and everything, and put it on the first train and send that too, which the local authorities denied.
Yeah.
Now, this to me, and I'm sure you feel the same, this kind of crystallizes the whole plot that Governor Crittenden was going to be a party to the beginning, to the end of the whole
He
thing.
was.
Okay.
He was right with it and in on it, had full knowledge of it from beginning to end.
All right. Then what happens to Jesse and then to the Ford boys after they got pardoned?
After the Ford boys was pardoned, Charlie went home there to Jackson County, Missouri. But Bob, he come up to Colorado and was up there, and then after Uncle Jesse went to South America, and he is over there for a little over a year, and while he was gone, Frank James walked in the Governor Crittenden's office and gave himself up, surrendered himself and his guns.
In other words, he was a fugitive
to the
from
governor.
justice.
He was an outlaw. He was one of the outlaws, the two brothers. Well, when Frank surrendered, he was taken to Independence, Missouri, and was put in jail, and they had 3 indictments against him in Jackson County, and then they had another indictment against him at another place for murder. So he stood trial 2 different places. He was acquitted and set free by the early part of 1883. He was a free man, Frank was. So then he comes up to Colorado, and him and Bob Ford went in business together. They owned and operated a theater in Colorado City, Colorado.
Is that close to Creed, Colorado, which is a resort town?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then they run that theater for a while, and then they dissolved partnerships, and Frank went back to Kentucky. Bob went to Creed and opened up a saloon in a tent. And that's what he was doing when he got shot and killed. He was killed in 1892.
Could you tell us how he was killed? Was he set up to
He was shot in the back.
Shot in the back.
Yeah.
And I understand from some writing that Jesse and the man who killed him were in Pueblo in a gambling hall, hotel, a few days before the killing took place.
That's pretty well correct.
All right. Now, Bob Ford, about what year?
See, Bob got to be a heavy drinker, and he got to talking in his beer.
In other words, he started telling
And
too
he
much.
was telling things that he hadn't all told, and that ain't very good business. And he didn't live long when he got to talking too much.
All right.
The man that originally was supposed to kill him, he got drunk and muffed the job. So they had to get another one, and they got Kelly to do it. Well, Kelly killed him, and then Kelly went back to the Indian Territory, and he didn't live but a short time, and he was killed there in the Indian Territory.
All right. Now, Brother Everhard, let's talk about Jesse as a family man. We know that he and his wife had 2 children. The boy
They
was
actually had 4. They lost a set of twins.
in childbirth, wasn't it?
Well, no, they lived 2 weeks.
2 weeks. All right. Now, the name, the girl was the older.
No,
The boy, his name was what?
Jesse for Jesse James, Edwards for Major John N. Edwards, who was a close friend of Jesse James. Jesse Edwards.
Now, throughout history, we hear and read about a Jesse James Jr., but
There never was a true Jesse James Jr. That was Bigelow's boy.
he named him it that way. I see.
That was Bigelow's boy. There never was, in truth and fact, a Jesse James Jr.
Where did Jesse leave his family when he left after the alleged killing?
After Bigelow was killed?
Yeah. Where did his family go?
They is left there in Missouri. I don't know just where, though.
Yeah.
That's the ironical part of it. I was so busy trying to keep up with him and learning all I could about what all he was, that I lost track of where she was, except she died in 1900. And she is buried in Missouri.
I see. Now, let's talk.
She was 55 years old when she died.
Let's talk about Frank. Now, Frank had one or two children.
To mine, as far as I ever knew, let's see, by Frank's first wife, who was Josephine Welch. Frank and Josephine had a boy and a girl. There was little Frank, they called him. He was Alexander Franklin James Jr., but they called him Little Frank. Then there was Mary Plana James, who married Charles Norris. That was Frank and Josephine's children.
Let's see.
And then Uncle Jesse told me that Robert James, who was Frank's and Annie's boy, that was an adopted boy. That was not actually Frank's blood son. That was an adopted boy.
All right, let's carry on down through history. Now, let's pick up Jesse's sister. What was her name?
Susie.
Susan.
Her name was Susan, S-U-S-A-N, Susan Lavinia.
And she married a soldier.
Alan Palmer, a Quantrill man.
During,
A Missourian. He was born and raised in Missouri, and he joined Quantrill during the war between the states. And when the war was over, him and Annie married. Him and Susie married. They called her Susie. Her name was Susan.
well, now, didn't Jesse introduce her husband-to-be?
I think so.
All right.
Because they was all with Quantrill together. And when Frank and Jesse used to come to Texas and stay a while, Susie used to get on the train and come to, I can't think of that little old town, not far from Austin.
Henrietta.
No, not
Oh,
Henrietta.
McNeil.
McNeil, a little place called McNeil, not far from Austin.
Little ghost
And
town.
there was a pretty good sized hotel there. Well, Frank and Jesse would put up at that hotel, and the railroad track was as close to the hotel. Well, it was just a street between the railroad track and the hotel. Susie would come by train and put up in that McNeil hotel and visit with her brothers.
Man Everhard, tell us now how Susan came into Arkansas. I understood she taught school there a while.
That's right, she taught school there. Well, she taught school first in Nebraska. There, Noah, I think. N-U-L-L-A, Noah.
And Jesse visited her a number of times in Arkansas.
Yeah, he visited her there, and then he visited her in Texas when she
Then
taught school in Texas.
and she moved across the Red River into Texas, and now where Wichita Falls, Texas
Is where she's buried now.
She's buried there. She lived a
And
life.
Jesse James was at her funeral.
She died in
That
1889,
is correct.
and
And that dead man, Jesse James, was at her funeral.
he was at her funeral, and Frank was working there in a dry goods store,
Let's see.
a grocery store.
No, I believe it is a ready-to-wear store.
Well, we used to
Clothing
call it
store.
Yeah, clothing store.
Yeah.
And it's well known among the people of Wichita Falls that Jesse was a visitor there many, many
That
times.
is correct.
Now,
That is correct.
and I want everybody to remember
And
that
all- Now, that is in 89.
89,
Jesse
and
James
Jesse-
was supposed to have been killed in
in
82.
82. That's right. That's right.
Looks kind of funny, don't it?
Well, it's just,
First time I ever knew of a dead man visiting.
well now, his mother, Zeldra, she visited both those children in Texas, both at Sherman, at Gainesville, and she went over to Fredericks, Oklahoma. That's where Frank was living later on.
Yeah.
And it was on that particular trip. That was 1911, wasn't it?
Well, she'd been to Fletcher. See,
Fletcher, yeah.
Frank bought some land in Fletcher and had a home put up there. The house now is a museum. But he built, well, I think he built most of the house himself. And him and Annie and little Frank, they lived in that house. And that's where Frank's mama, she come from Kearney to Fletcher and visited there 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. Anyway, I think Jesse visited there with him too.
I'm sure he did.
And then she started home and she died in a berth on in a railroad coach.
Pullman car.
Uh-huh. She's in the berth.
Yeah.
What about?
Just
Near-
outside of Oklahoma City.
That's right. And in other words, they took her body off the train at Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I've got a birth certificate, a death certificate,
Showing
and it
that.
shows Oklahoma City.
Ms. Everhard, we have covered now another phase, a chapter or many chapters of his life. We'll take another break, and then when we come back, we're going to pick up with Jesse and Billy the Kid, William Bonney. We want to show the connection between these two outlaws, because you cannot separate Jesse from Billy after about 1882, because they're so interwoven, and we'll give plenty of time to that. If you'll be kind enough
Well,
to...
see, Jesse, Billy's daddy, Wild Henry, he was not only one of the identifiers, he was at the funeral of Bigelow. And he went out to the house. He saw it all through till the grave was filled in.
All right.
And he come back to Texas and sat down and told little Billy and his wife all about that. He said it was a hoax. Said, why, Jesse's mother knew that wasn't Jesse James. We all knew it wasn't Jesse James. Said, I saw Jesse up there. He saw him as a pallbearer, you know.
Well, that's very good and most interesting, and we'll take a pause, a time out here. It's about your lunch time, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up the connection between the two, so that we can show the chain of events, and we can show how history should have been written back in the 1880s and 18... We are here at the home of Mrs. Ola Everhard and her husband, Aubrey, with the purpose in mind of having a conversation over the life of Billy and Jesse James being her third cousin. And we'll pick up now, Ms. Everhard, with the life of Jesse after the killing and after he returned from 1 year in South America.
Well, when he come back from South America and paid his sister a visit in Arkansas, and then he come to Texas and joined the Texas Rangers under the name of Benjamin Franklin Johnson. And he was the ranger that was sent to Killeen to straighten up the nigger trouble there. And then, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't think I am, from after that he went and rejoined the marshal force and become a deputy United States Marshal. He had been that before.
Where was he stationed as a United States Deputy Marshal?
Ardmore Indian Territory in the surrounding area.
Of Oklahoma.
That's right. It's Oklahoma now. It wasn't then.
That's right.
And then, let me see, during his days in the Indian Territory, the dates, let's see, in 1893, 92, he made the run for land in the Indian Territory.
Oh, the Sooners.
And he got a farm that was located 8.5 miles from Lawton. And while he was living on that farm, he was a legislator in the territorial legislature. And that was appointed. Then when when the Indian Territory went into statehood, he was elected to the legislature again. But the second time he was elected. The first time he was appointed.
But did he go by the name of Jesse James or
No.
Frank Dalton or?
No, when he was appointed, in the Indian Territory, he was James, let me think now. can't.
Well, you knew he had 32 alias names.
Yeah. What was his? Can you think of?
I thought it was Wilson.
No, that's when he was elected.
I see.
Jess Wilson when he was elected, but when he was appointed, he was James. Oh, I can't think of.
Well, we have it down in our
Yeah.
book. I can't remember all
I
those
can't
aliases.
remember that. There's a doggone many of them. It keeps my head going in the skin. And but he got his farm under another name too. See,
That's right.
so it's hard to, unless you look back on your records, it's kind of hard to keep up with all those names just in your head.
Well, you knew we have the warranty copies of the warranty deeds
That
to
is,
support what you said and
That
what he
is
told
right.
you.
that is right.
And I would like to also refresh our
And I
mind.
got a picture of him when he was in the state legislature.
And, that's right.
Jess Wilson.
And you knew that I researched all of his serving in the Texas Rangers under 3 different names.
You sure did. And
And
I
I've got
was
the
thinking
documents.
about something a while ago. I have, and you have a copy of, article that we got out of the state of Missouri that nobody to date knows who Frank Dalton really was. Because the real Frank Dalton was killed in the line of duty as a Deputy United States Marshal.
That's right, over in Arkansas and
That is right.
under Judge Isaac
Hanging
Parker.
Judge Parker.
That's right.
He was the hanging judge. Well, the real Frank Dalton was a deputy marshal. But then Uncle Jesse used the name Frank Dalton, and he also used J. Frank Dalton.
True.
But in the state of Missouri, I have a copy of an article in which one of the buildings there connected with the educational department said to date, nobody knows who Frank Dalton, J. Frank Dalton really was.
But you do.
But I have no trouble
That's right.
with
You have no trouble with that at all.
it. No.
Now, Miss Everhard, let's move right.
Because that J. Frank Dalton was like this. The J was for Jesse, his own first name. The Frank was for his brother Frank, and the Dalton was his mother's maiden name. He put them together, J. Frank Dalton.
A while ago, we were talking about Jesse being in Texas down at Hyco, which is about 70 miles southwest Fort Worth, Texas. And that's when he went to his friend, old Wild Bill Henry Roberts, Billy the Kid's daddy,
Yeah.
and his mother, his stepmother, took care of him for 6 weeks until he got well enough. Then Frank, his brother, came down out of,
And
got him and took him out. Now, let's see if we can connect Billy the Kid with Jesse from here on out. And first thing we should review, when was Billy the Kid born?
He was born in the last hour of the last day of December 1859
And about where was he?
at Buffalo Gap, Texas,
Yeah.
in a log cabin.
Buffalo Gap, as you recall, is 10 miles south of Abilene, Texas.
That's right.
It's on the state highway between Abilene and San Angelo, Texas. And at the time, there was nothing there but just probably a few stables and relay place where the cavalry.
I think it was more or less a stage relay.
That's right, stage relay. That's right. Now, we assume that his daddy was driving probably some cattle, and Billy was probably born either in a kind of a dugout or in a
he's in a
covered
log
wagon.
cabin.
Log cabin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uncle Jesse told me that he was born in a log cabin. That's where I got my
Okay.
information.
And then
And
the.
his mother was Adeline Dunn.
That's right.
And Billy the Kid's parents, both of them, were Kentuckians. They were natives of Kentucky, both of them.
Came near Lexington, Kentucky.
That's right. They were both natives of Kentucky.
Now, Ms. Everhard, after after Billy was about 2 years old, did his father leave the home?
He went to the war between the states.
That was in 63.
Some people call it the Civil War, but Uncle Jesse told me there wasn't anything civil about it. It was war, and war as hell.
Well, who do you think that little baby Billy the Kid
So
lived with?
Adeline died and left Billy, and there was his daddy gone to war, and his mother dead. And this Kathleen Bonnie, she was a half-sister of Adeline's.
In other words, they had
So
the same mother.
she came and from Kentucky, and she had a boy of her own, about the same age as Billy's. But she come and got Billy and took him with her and raised him.
With her mother, which is Billy's grandmother.
Then Billy come after the war, and while Henry married again, Billy come back to live with his daddy a while.
Now, where was that?
At
Arlington?
Carlton.
Near Hyco,
Yeah.
9 miles.
But while Henry, Uncle Jesse told me while Henry was so rough and tough on Billy, that Billy run off from home at the age of 14.
You know what caused him to run off from home other than just abuse?
That's all I
Child
know.
abuse?
That's all I know. As far as I know, he got tired of his daddy beating the tar out of him, so he just run off.
Yeah.
He run off from home, joined up with a cattle drive.
Where did that cattle drive? Where do you pick that up?
I can't think right now off the top of my head, but
Over there by Sulphur Springs, Texas.
was it?
And he crossed the Red River over into the Indian Territory, which is Oklahoma,
Yeah.
and he went to a little community called Briartown, B-R-I-A-R, which
And
is...
there he lived, when he was in Briartown, excuse me, Bell Star had a place right on the Canadian River, you might say. And so Billy went out and stayed with Bell a while. And of course Jesse was in and out of there, and Frank was in and out of there, and Cole and Jim and Bob Younger, and lots of the Quantrill men. And some of them was outlaws and some of them wasn't, but of course Frank and Jesse was. And Bell told Billy you can stay as long as you want to, but Billy decided he didn't want to stay.
Where did he really want to go?
So he went back to his stepmother, his half-aunt,
Now, where was
Kathleen. She was, I believe she was in Indiana.
That's right, Cincinnati.
Yeah. Well, then she married again and married this McCarty. And McCarty was killed during the war between the states. He was a Confederate.
He was her first husband,
No,
McCarty.
I don't think so. I think,
And then she married Antrim.
well, I know, but Bonnie was her first husband, wasn't it?
No, Bonnie was her maiden name.
Was her maiden name.
See,
Well, I guess McCarty was
Yeah.
her first husband.
He died at Chattanooga,
So-
Tennessee, with a gunshot wound.
Yeah, in the war between the states.
That's right. That's right.
And then she met Antrim, and they was in business together a while in Kansas.
Yeah, she ran the Wichita, Kansas hand laundry, and he was kind of a gentleman farmer. And both of them, as you recall, got government land from the Osage Indians. They paid $2 an acre, and it's recorded in Wichita, Kansas to this day. And as you know, you've got a copy of the warranty deed, where she got it through the United States government, signed by the President of the United States.
And then Antrim and her decided that, well, he wanted to come to New Mexico,
Why?
and because there's silver mines in
That's
Silver
right.
City. So she gathered up her boy and little Billy,
Joseph and little Bill.
and they come to Silver City, Santa Fe first, I believe.
And that's where they got married, you remember?
And then they went to Silver City and they married there. And I think she's buried there.
Yeah. She died in the following year, September the 16th, 1874.
Yeah, she run rooming house,
That's a
rooming
boarding
and
house.
boarding house.
And while he worked in the mines.
And then Billy stayed on with his stepdaddy a while. What he called his stepdaddy,
Yeah.
Antrim.
That's right.
But he had to work in a hotel there for his room and board while he went to school. And he got a little bit of schooling there. He
True.
didn't get much schooling, but he got, what little he got was all there at Silver City.
That's true.
And from there, he got in with a bunch of some whites and some Mexicans, and they done a lot of things that wasn't exactly looked on as up to par.
Yeah. You recall that they broke into a Chinese laundry there at Silver City.
Yeah,
and
but
took
Billy said he wasn't, he was accused of that, but he wasn't in on it.
He was a bystander.
Yeah, he was just a looker. He wasn't in on it.
Well, didn't he go from there over to Fort Grant, Arizona, and looking for a job?
I think so.
And he got
He
it.
just roamed around first one place and then another, and from time to time, him and Uncle Jesse would get together.
Sure.
So Uncle Jesse could sort of see how he was doing. Uncle Jesse kind of watched him grow up. See, there's 12 years difference in their
That's
age.
right.
And Uncle Jesse always felt awful sorry for him. So then Billy went to, in 1910 and part 11, Billy the Kid went to Torreon, Mexico. And so it wasn't long till Uncle Jesse went to Torreon, Mexico. That's over in the interior. Well, Billy lived across the street, sort of at an angle from Billy.
The plaza there.
And down the street, a little ways from them, was one of Pancho Villa's wives. I say one because Pancho, Pancho had a lot of wives, so you have to kind of number them, you know.
That's true.
And then when the war started over there in Mexico,
You
Billy,
mean the revolution?
yeah, see, Billy was a pretty wealthy man, had money in the bank over there. Uncle Jesse told me, and said if Billy'd had any education, he could have really done good. But of course, he was lacking on education. But when that revolution started, Uncle Jesse and Billy, they got back on the American side, and if I'm not mistaken, they come down and crossed the Rio Grande at Brownsville, Texas.
And you recall Billy went to his cousin, who was John Heath. And I looked it up for you. You know, you told me to research it. I went to Austin, Texas, and the Texas Rangers headquarters, and I found the picture, and I found the whole enlistment of his cousin, which is 100% true.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, as the years went on, Jesse and Billy stayed in touch with one another best they could. And whenever one of them took a notion to go see about the other, they just picked up their shoes and here they went, you know. So when Uncle Jesse come out with his true identity in 1948, and he went to Guthrie, Oklahoma, Billy left Hyco and went to Guthrie and spent a week at the hotel there with Uncle Jesse. And then when Uncle Jesse had his 102nd birthday celebration in the Merrimack Caverns in Missouri, Billy went there. Well, then when Uncle Jesse come back home to our house, when he come to our house the first time, and Billy wrote to him, and I answered the letter, Uncle Jesse told me then, said, that's the real Billy the Kid. Said, oh, that's who you're writing to. Because I've known him all of his life. He's the real Billy the Kid. Said he wasn't but 7 years old when I was there at their place, and I know he's the Billy the Kid, because I've been keeping up with him all these years.
Ms. Everhard, why did this oil man over in East Texas back in the 30s, why was he so good and befriended especially Jesse James and also Billy. He furnished
Are
their
you
money.
talking about DeWitt Travis?
DeWitt Travis.
Well, let me see. During the war between the states, back in Missouri, to begin with, DeWitt's mother went to school with Jesse, and she knew he was Jesse James. Then when the war between the states come along, Uncle Jesse heard that trouble was coming their way. Their name, his mother's name was Patterson.
That's right.
So Uncle Jesse helped them to get to safety. And from then on, they become very close friends. Then they all come to Texas. And DeWitt just grew up knowing Uncle Jesse, knew who he was, and stayed right by him, went with him, took him anywhere he wanted to go, went to Canada and stayed a while with him when Uncle Jesse lived there. This was back in 34, 35, and 33 and 34 and 35. Uncle Jesse owned a ranch in Canada. I've got the map that shows the exact location where the ranch was, 320-acre ranch. And then DeWitt seen to it that Uncle Jesse got whatever he needed, and I never did question Uncle Jesse on it because he's older than I am, and I thought it wasn't none of my business to be so nosy, even though I basically have got nose trouble.
Well, now,
nonetheless, I think Uncle Jesse, what money he had saved to take care of him at his death, he put it in DeWitt's name, so DeWitt could take care of things, because DeWitt did take care of the funeral when Uncle Jesse died.
that's right. Both you and DeWitt Travis went to the funeral there at
We were
Granbury.
right together, me and him, because, see, I was 20 miles away from home before I realized I'd forgot my gun. So when DeWitt got there, I said, "Oh, God, I'm glad to see you." And I said, "Have you got your gun?" And he just pulled up his breeches leg and patted his boot, and I looked down there, and there was his six-shooter in his boot. And I said, "Boy, stay close to me. Don't leave me."
Why were you afraid?
Because Hope wanted to kill me.
He had threatened your life.
He threatened my life. I got a letter just before I left Austin that if I come to that funeral, I wouldn't live to leave it.
Now, Mr. Hope was Jesse's agent, our business manager.
He was the one, the flunky, we called him.
Yeah.
And he was a confidence man, he was a thief, he was a liar, he was a cheat, you name it, he was it. See? But he did not want me to be with Uncle Jesse because Uncle Jesse would tell me things that he wouldn't tell him. Of course, we were related. Uncle Jesse wasn't related to him.
Well, didn't Mr. Hope tell
And
you
old Hope didn't care about Uncle Jesse, nor his life, his health, or anything. He was concerned with the Jesse James buried treasure. So one day Uncle Jesse asked me, "Ola, do you think I've got any money buried?" I said, "Why, certainly not." He said, "Well, why don't you? Everybody else does." I said, "Uncle Jesse, you got a lot of years on your head. How do they think you lived all these years?" He said, "Well, you're right." Said, "Lots of people don't stop and think that back in my outlaw days, it took more money for us to live than it did." Said, "By the time I divided the money, whatever we got, by the time I divided it among all my men, none of us had a whole lot of money. And we had to live, and it cost," said, "where you could go get a meal at a reasonable price. If people was kind enough to feed us, we felt indebted to see that they were well paid. In other words, a meal that we'd pay $2 for, it cost them 10. You get the picture."
Messia, which is now Las Cruces, that he met Jesse there under an alias name.
That is correct.
Do you feel free to tell us who that name or what that name was? Didn't make that.
I can't. I believe it was Jim McDaniel.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
All right, and then didn't Billy also in his testimony about a year before he died, said that Jesse and Belle Starr had been visiting out in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and Fort
Well,
Sumter.
and Jesse was there a lot of times, and Billy too, there at Las Vegas, New Mexico, because that used to be quite a gambling center.
That's right. That's right. He
And
stayed.
Uncle Jesse had an illness of playing poker, you know. That was his main hobby.
Didn't Frank go up into west of Amarillo and become a Texas Ranger at Tascosa,
That is
Texas?
correct. He sure did.
Well, when did he go there?
And, well, can't remember the year.
1884, I think.
Might be, I can't.
See, he was defeated in New Mexico as a sheriff,
Yeah.
and he went over there to clean up the cattle rustling.
And the man that was supposed to have killed Billy the Kid was right up there and knew Frank James and seen him, was with him. And then me and you both got pictures of them
Oh, yes.
together.
Frank James and Pat Garrett are together in a picture made in 1886 at Tascosa, and both of them were in the Texas Ranger.
And you know, Garrett had a daughter, and she was blind, and she was a piano teacher
At Roswell.
at Roswell. And I've got this friend at Victoria, Texas, that's way up in her 80s now. She knew Billy, Pat Garrett's daughter, and they were talking one day, this friend of mine and Pat Garrett's daughter. And Pat Garrett's daughter said, my daddy never killed Billy the Kid, they were friends.
He bought him his first pair of boots, I understand.
And she wrote that to me, and I've got it in a letter, written in her own handwriting. So, Uncle Jesse told me that was not Billy in that grave over there.
Miss Everhard, how did Billy come out to the surface? How did he come out and tell people who he was? How did that come about?
That is after Uncle Jesse come out with his true identity.
Well, who was the man that did
And
that?
Billy wanted people to know who he actually was. It was kind of pitiful. He got tired of going by alias names too, I guess. And so he wrote to Uncle Jesse about this William V. Morrison. William V. Morrison, who lived, I believe, in St. Louis at that particular time. And he was not only an attorney at law, but he was a member of the Genealogical Society
Of Missouri.
of the state of Missouri. And so Billy began to talk to him about getting a pardon for him. And
Who did he want to get a pardon from?
the governor of the state of New Mexico.
That was Thomas Mabry,
Yeah,
1950.
yeah. So I kept in touch. See, I wrote to Billy all the time, and I kept in touch with him all the time that was going on. And I remember when he come up here, Morrison wrote to me, and so did Billy. And I knew when that was going on. But when Billy got up to New Mexico, they seen a lot of people that knew Billy in Old Mexico. They went over into Old Mexico to Juarez. They went to El Paso, and Morrison and Billy went over to Juarez and met some people over there he knew. And they met people other places. But when they got to the capital, Billy got scared. And
What
he got
scared him?
nervous because he had been in so much through his years, and he had a lot of years on his head and a heart condition too. And so he just got sick. And they wouldn't give him a pardon. They turned him down.
Well, did the governor keep faith with him about, they're supposed to have a private conference, but
No, but the governor didn't. He didn't.
what did the governor
He
Mabry
had a
do
whole bunch of people in there, and that's what scared Billy.
in his office?
Now, he was supposed to met privately with Morrison and Billy. But he lied to Billy. He didn't keep his word. He, in truth, didn't mean a thing to him. He just had a whole bunch of people in there. And I can appreciate how Billy would feel walking in there. He didn't know what they was liable to do.
What did Marson and Billy do when the governor said, "I'll have no part of this"?
I believe they just, best I can remember, it's been a long time ago now, and I've been working on other things, but I think they just loaded up and left out there.
Well, Billy had a light heart attack, you remember?
So then Billy come on back to Hyco, and in December,
About 3 weeks later.
in December I got Billy and DeWitt Travis and Billy's wife Lizzie. They was all preparing to come spend the weekend with me and Mama and Aubrey. And so we was expecting them when I heard on the news that Billy had wrote me a letter and had gone downtown to mail it.
At Hyco.
At Hyco, Texas, and when he got in front of the newspaper office there, he dropped dead of a heart attack. Now, whatever become of the letter that he wrote me is anybody's guess. But he died. He died just, that was on about Thursday, I think, and they were supposed to be at our house on Saturday.
That was December, about
He died on the 31st.
That's right, last of the...
So that must have been the 29th when he mailed that letter.
Could have been. Well, how did, who told you actually about Billy dying? Did you get a call?
I heard it on the news.
You heard it? Well, when did you tell
and
Jesse?
Then Lizzie
His wife.
wrote me, and then Morrison wrote me, and I'm the one that had to go out to the hospital and break the news to Uncle Jesse. And that, nobody likes to deliver that kind of news. But when I told Uncle Jesse about Billy dying, Uncle Jesse said, well, well, I lost a mighty good friend, and the tears just rolled down his face.
He really cried.
He sure did. Yeah, that was pretty, that's not easy to stand by and see a thing like that, you know. You're so helpless, you can't do anything, you know.
How far is Billy buried from Jesse's grave?
Not very far. They're pretty close together.
About 30 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And Billy's buried there at Hamilton.
at Hamilton, Texas.
And Jesse's buried at Granbury.
That's right.
That's not very far apart.
No, about 25 miles.
Billy died in December of 50 and Jesse died in August of 51. That was a difference in their death.
Billy Everhard, do you recall some of the letters you received from people who identified Billy the kid as the real one? There was one fellow from up in Indiana that had been his buddy. They fought together over in the Ozark Mountains up in Oklahoma and southern part of Missouri.
I've got several letters here, but I don't remember the number, the amount of them, you know.
Well, could you tell us something that they said that you knew that they knew what they were talking about?
Honestly, right now, I don't remember. It's been, you know, if you don't read back on them every once in a while.
Well, maybe I can refresh your mind. You sent me a copy, a Xerox copy of a letter that you got in response to a letter that you had written to Ozark Jack, which
Ozark Jack Burlington.
That's right.
Petersburg, Indiana.
That's right. That you were telling about Jesse, and he was so grateful to you. He wrote you about a 5-page letter, and in that he said time and again about Jesse and so on, and about him meeting him the last time was at the Merrimack Caverns.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, Ozark Jack was he was with Jesse too at Tascosa, and Billy the kid was there.
That's right.
And there was 2 men come in the saloon, the old Blue Goose Saloon at Tascosa.
That's right.
A rough and tumble place. No telling how many men's buried under that building.
Right.
But anyhow, nice cheerful thought, isn't it? Well, anyhow, Billy was there, and Ozark was there, and Jesse was there, and these 2 men come in, and one of them got shooting. Billy, he laid down on the floor and played dead. Ozark Jack, he went out the door and he got shot as he went out. And he staggered on out in the yard. And when the bullets stopped flying, oh, Al Jennings was there too, him and his gang. When the bullets stopped flying, when Billy looked up and seen that the man with the gun was gone. So he run outside to see about Ozark. Well, there was Ozark laying there shot, bleeding, and begging for water. So Billy the Kid went over to the windmill, which was a little ways from the saloon, and he got some water in his hat and brought it back and give Ozark Jack a drink out of his hat. And then after that he laughed and tell Ozark, "You owe me your life. I saved your life. Brought you a drink of water."
Well, there's another very important letter. You sent me a copy of it. I'd like to refresh your mind. It was from Frank James' daughter. She wrote a letter to you and asking about Jesse and so on while you were living in Austin.
When I lived there, lived there in Austin. Her name was Mary Plana. James, Frank's daughter, and she married Charles Norris.
Now, where were they living then?
And they lived at Claremore, Oklahoma. And so she wrote me, she heard that Uncle Jesse was there at home with us. So she wrote me and said, "I'm so glad to hear that you're related and that you got Uncle Jesse with you." And she told me then, after telling me about her own health, see, she is up in her 80s. She said, "I wish I could come down to Austin and cook Uncle Jesse some chicken and dumplings because that's one of his favorite foods. I am the only daughter, legitimate daughter, that Frank James had. All others that claims to be his daughter, they're illegitimate." That's her wording.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought that was a dignified way of putting it.
That's right. After Billy and Jesse, they would meet each other and over a period of years there, and then they both settled together with DeWitt Travis at Gladewater, Texas. And don't you recall, DeWitt said in one of his letters that I took Billy the Kid to Dr. Cruz.
Well, see, Billy had, as you know, and everybody that's ever seen a picture of Billy, in the main picture everybody goes by, Billy had some tush teeth up here, and it made his mouth out of shape and his face out of shape. So Uncle Jesse and DeWitt encouraged him to go to Dr. Cruz and have those tush teeth extracted.
That was 1932.
Yeah. And Billy was in 36, I believe it was. Uncle Jesse broke his leg. Billy and his wife was living at Hyco.
Hyco?
And Uncle Jesse, when he come out of the hospital from that broken leg, he went out and stayed a while with
What did he live in?
35.
Overton?
That's,
Wasn't in Allfield? At Overton?
oh, Uncle Jesse was. Billy wasn't with him, but Uncle Jesse. Billy was living in Hyco.
Uncle Jesse broke his leg in East Texas.
Well, he was living in a hotel when he broke his leg, but he didn't go back and live there because he had to live by himself. And Uncle,
But I mean, Billy lived in East Texas.
yeah, he
At
did.
Overton.
Yeah.
Now, as I recall, Billy got a job over there. It was during the Depression. Even though it was oil boom days in East Texas, there was a depression. And Billy was too old, and Jesse was too old to work. And poor DeWitt, he had plenty of money, and he just took them over as...
He kept them going.
He kept them going.
Uncle Jesse made a little extra money because I'll tell you how he done it. He wrote short stories and sold them.
Yeah.
Argosy magazine.
He wrote for Argosy, he wrote for different newspapers, and he'd make a little money along selling the short story. He wrote about the Civil War, you know.
Now, we
He never
have...
did write about the James boys, and because it's like he told me one time, I asked him, I said, you hail from Missouri, and I thought I'd read you this book about the James boys. Thought maybe you knew 'em. He said, well, honey, I've been out to their place, but every time I went, they was always gone.
Now, back with the connection between Billy and Jesse, it's known fact that Jesse did visit in and around Fort Worth, Hyco, Carlton,
Oh, very much.
and
so.
Frank did too, because Frank lived up at Wichita Falls.
And Frank lived at Fort Worth.
He lived at Fort Worth.
And he worked 4 years for Sanger Brothers
In
at
Dallas.
Fort Worth.
It's a
I
big
mean,
department.
Dallas.
Yeah.
And he lived, him and Annie, that was his second wife's name, Annie. She was Annie Ralston.
That's right.
Him and Annie lived at Dallas. And Frank was the floor walker at Sanger Brothers for 4 consecutive years. And when Uncle Jesse come back from the Spanish-American War, Frank was working out there at Sanger Brothers.
Now, isn't it a fact that everybody in Wichita Falls, you bring up the name of the Palmers, Frank and Jesse, they all say, well, they lived here, and Jesse came here, and Jesse even came to his sister's funeral
That is
in
correct.
1889.
That's right.
That's right, and they're buried in the prominent cemetery
That
there.
is right. And got nice tombstones.
That's right, we got pictures of them.
Yeah.
And so, now, in your mind, we've established pretty definitely from what you've said, there's no question in your mind but what you know that J. Frank Dalton was the honest, one and only Frank Dalton. You also
J. Frank Dalton and Jesse James was one and the same person.
Even though he did have...
That is exactly right. James McDaniel is the name. He was a legislator under. James McDaniel. Then when he was elected, he had a different name.
Well, now, you heard the tapes. You remember a while back, a year or so ago,
Maury's tape.
Maury Davidson, who is now retired, he was an NBC radio announcer in New York, and he had Jesse and Billy on a program up there on that famous program called We the People on January the 13th,
Uncle Jesse called me from New York, from the hotel room, and I talked about 30 minutes to him when he was laying on a bed in a hotel room in New York just before he went on that program.
And you've heard those tapes?
Yes, and then when Maury come here in 82, I think it was.
82, 83. He
I
came
think
right in
it's
this room.
Well, it's 82 because my brother was still living.
Okay.
And, yeah, it was 82. And Maury brought a tape, and I heard them tapes, and that was done of the birthday party, Uncle Jesse's 102nd
Chair?
birthday party.
Is on no chair?
See, Uncle Jesse was on the 5th day of September, 1949. Uncle Jesse was 102 years old. And they had a wing-dinging birthday party for him. And among those present was DeWitt Travis, Colonel James R. Davis, Nigger John Trammell, and,
Ozark?
oh, no, I don't believe
Yes, he was there.
Yes, he was
Ozark.
there.
Yeah, Ozark
He's
was
in the
there.
picture.
And Billy?
And Mary James Norris was there, because
Billy?
I got her picture with Ozark Jack. She was
Billy?
there. And Billy was there.
Ms. Everhard, now, you've covered this very well, and you've done an excellent job. And the next question I want to ask you this. You held all this material for over, well, from 1950 to 1982.
Correction.
When you
from 1947, I
Before-
began. From 47 on, I've had a lot of material.
Well, in other words, you've had it longer. You've had all these years, and you have tried your best to get some recognition from Missouri.
I wanted people to see the truth and accept the truth.
What kind of response did you get from people in Missouri about Jesse?
Well, they wouldn't even answer me, wouldn't even give me a reply.
Well, how did they treat you at Lawton when you was up there and you had 30,000 people there, and the newspaper and the radios was blaring?
None of them made any comment except I happened to see, before they took Uncle Jesse out of the motel room and put him in a Cadillac convertible to take him downtown, they had a psychiatrist go into him. I don't know who had that brainstorm, but somebody decided they'd have a psychiatrist come in there. I guess it was because he was 100 years old.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Anyway, me and Aubrey was standing just real close to the door when this psychiatrist come out the door after examining Uncle Jesse. And he said, "My God, there ain't a thing wrong with that man's mind." Said, "Well, he's got the mind of a 35-year-old man. He's smarter than I am."
So he wasn't senile.
He was not senile at all. And me and Aubrey happened to be in the motel talking to Uncle Jesse when this fella from, well, later from Chicago, but he used to be the detective in St. Louis, John Shevlin, when he come to see Uncle Jesse. See, in 1901 or 2, I can't remember exactly which, but 1901 or 1902, Shevlin was in Arkansas, Hot Springs, Arkansas. And Jesse went to Hot Springs and he run a shooting gallery there. And Shevlin was the one that issued him the license to operate the shooting gallery. And Shevlin had seen an old white-haired man before that was taking tickets at a theater in St. Louis in about 83, somewhere along there, 84. But he never paid any attention to him. And then another time, Shevlin had been sent out to catch the pickpockets that was following a road show that was displaying. It was Cole Younger and Frank James. They had a bunch of Jesse James's clothes and boots and guns, and they had a road show made up, and they was traveling around showing people. Well, the man that was taking the tickets and selling the tickets was none other than Jesse James. And Shevlin had seen him there, and me and Aubrey seen Shevlin when he come in Lawton there at the motel. And instead of Uncle Jesse saying, "Hello, Mr. Shevlin," he just looked up at Shevlin and said, "Well, John, you shaved your mustache off, didn't you?" And that like to cause Shevlin to faint. He knew then that was the same man that had run the shooting gallery in Arkansas.
Another point, all these years you've tried your best to tell what you've told us here today, and you got no cooperation from historians up in Missouri.
Oh, no.
And everybody...
Texas either.
That's right. And they tried their best to just make you out as a total feeble-minded lady.
Yeah, senile.
Yeah. Now, how can you account for all the records and everything up in Missouri being destroyed, even as late as 1950?
Well, you know, I've thought a lot about that, and maybe it's the fact that when Uncle Jesse was preparing to come out with his name, which he promised his mother he'd do it when he got to be 100, maybe he had friends that helped him to sort of get rid of some records, or maybe they never was there. I don't really know. I do know one thing, that the coroner refused to sign a death certificate for Charlie Bigelow.
To this day, you have a letter, because you sent me a copy, that the...
I've got that on legal form letter out of Missouri.
So there bound to have been some doubt, or it would have been filed.
That's right.
And all the newspapers have been destroyed.
And you can't find... I've got some stuff that I copied out of the 1882 newspapers, but they are not in existence anymore, those 1882 newspapers.
Now here's another startling...
Now, Frank Hall's wife she brought him to my house, and she stayed a week with us. And while she was there, and her and Mama was talking, well, I copied down a lot of stuff out of that paper, you know, 'cause she had to take the papers back. See, Frank was with the Lawton Constitution newspaper in Lawton. He's the one that broke the story, you know. And, he used to call me at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning from the Lawton Constitution newspaper.
Ms. Everhard, it is a fact that you have entertained NBC, Associated Press, UPI people here, and your story, part of it, as you've told us today, has been given to the American people from coast to coast.
All over the United States, Hawaii, Canada, and about a month ago I found out that it's still going in Canada. Because a girl that wrote to me from there, whose last name is Wall, she sent me my picture. She cut out the paper. There, see.
Shoot.
Now about Billy.
Back in 1939, you know, Uncle Jesse was he was a whiz with a handgun. Any kind of gun, as a matter of fact, but particularly with pistols. So they were in 1939 in Corpus Christi, Texas. They was having a political doings down there, and for entertainment, they decided to have a shooting match. Well, the sheriff he was a master. He was the champ, you know. So they barred him from entering the shooting match, and they barred Uncle Jesse from entering the shooting match. He was the MC, but they wouldn't let him enter the shooting match. But him and the sheriff decided they would do a little exhibition shooting after the shooting match was over. So one of the things that Uncle Jesse done, he got a tin can, just any ordinary tin can, got somebody to throw it up in the air. Now, in 1939, Uncle Jesse had a lot of years on his head. Remember that? They threw that can up in the air, and he took a 6-shooter in each hand, and he kept that can in the air till both guns was empty.
Same thing in East Texas.
And he done the same thing in another exhibition in East Texas. He done the same thing in Canada, at a place there.
Got newspaper write-ups.
Uh-huh.
Now, Uncle Jesse has told you many times that Billy, he felt sorry for Billy, because Billy did not know how to read very well, and very little.
He said he was very poorly educated, poor little fellow. That's the way he always put it.
Now, you know, some of our critics and history writers, they say that in all probability that Billy Kid read all this, and then when Morrison took him on the trip to backtrack all the places that he went in the state of New Mexico to see if he was really telling the truth or knew what the truth was.
But he never found him wrong one time.
No, sir.
No.
You remember Mr. Morrison, before he died with a heart attack, you remember, in 77.
Yeah.
He said wherever my car went, he would tell me ahead of time, 10 or 12 minutes ahead of time, what we'd see.
Billy didn't have any education, but he had a fantastic memory.
That's right. And
Uncle Jesse had a fantastic memory.
And we both believe, beyond any shadow of doubt, all this baloney that has been in our history books, Billy was not a murderer. He killed only about 3 or 4, and those people...
If it was a matter of his life or theirs.
That's right.
Well, I think anybody would turn, if you want to call that a murderer, I might do that if I thought somebody was going to shoot me. I believe in self-preservation.
And you
better believe it.
From all that you've heard from Jesse and all the 6 years of research I've done, I've talked to those great-grandchildren of the times that was up there in Lincoln County. I've talked to them personally. Some of them wouldn't talk to me unless they had their lawyer present in the room. And every one of them told me this: you will never find anywhere where Billy ever robbed a stagecoach, or attacked a woman, or robbed a bank. And the only people that he came in contact were those who killed his boss there at
if you disturbed if you hurt somebody that was dear to him, he was going to retaliate. Now, you can bet on that. Or if it meant saving his life, Well, I don't consider that a murderer.
No. And I think that's one thing, what you said, my research, that we have proven beyond any question of doubt that
I have no doubt in my mind, Bill, that William Henry Roberts, better known to some people as Brushy Bill, was none other than the real Billy the Kid.
that's right.
Nor do I have any doubt, nor have I ever had any doubt, that J. Frank Dalton and all them other alias names by which he went was none other than the real Jesse James, the outlaw.
Ms. Everhard, we appreciate your attitude and what you've said, and I think that...
And those that hollers that it wasn't, how can they say that when they didn't even know him? I did.
Right.
And I was taught not to call my ancestors liars.
And I've said, and I've told you, nobody would put up an imposter and spend the money and the time and work as you have, when you could use the money for other things.
You bet.
Unless it's true.
If I hadn't have loved Uncle Jesse, because that's my cousin, and he done a lot of bad things.
You didn't love what he did,
He done a lot of good things too. While he done some bad things, he done enough good ones to offset it.
And that all started when he's 14 years old and they was trying to hang him by the neck.
But when you go back, if people would just take the trouble to go back and think back, when one of the first blows, Jesse's father deserted him before Jesse was even 2 years old.
What did his father do?
Got the gold field and took off for the gold fields of California, never to return. Then, before the war between the states started, there was all that trouble with the Jayhawkers and the Redlegs.
Now, who are they?
That's the Kansas Jayhawkers and the Redlegs that was renegades that would come over into Missouri, and they would rob people, burn their barns, steal the horses, steal the cattle, rape the women. And that caused a lot of trouble for Missouri is a divided state. Half of it is the north and half the south. And that's where the Mason-Dixon line goes through there. And they'd come over on that southern side and they'd persecute those people. Well, the Missourians, they got a belly full of that, and they went over and done a little retaliating. But they didn't bother the women folks and the children, you know. And then when you stop and think about it, when Uncle Jesse come back from the war, well, before he went to the war between the states, well, they hung him, they beat him, they put his mother in jail, and his little brother, and his little half-brother, and his little half-sisters.
How old was he then?
He was, well, let's see, he is in the war when they took his mother and the family. He was 15 or 16, about 16 years old. But they beat the blood out of him when he was 14. He run to the house from the field with blood running down his back. And then they come out there and put a rope around his neck and pulled him half running to the barn and threw the rope up over the hay lift and pulled him up. And then they rode off, and his mother run out there and cut the rope and got him down and got him in the house. And he told me, he said, that happened like this morning. And it was like late tomorrow evening before I realized how close to death I came. He died at the age of 100 and almost 104 with rope burn scars still on his neck.
Didn't the nurses at the Breckenridge Hospital, Austin, Texas, ask you where did he get all that scar tissue around his neck?
That's right. But I didn't give him an answer. I just let him. I was afraid they would mistreat him when I wasn't around, you know. So I was a little cautious about what I
Well, you had reasons to.
you know. And then after the war between the states, Frank and Jesse wanted to come back home and live quiet, normal lives. But see, they were with Quantrill. Quantrill was a guerrilla group. And public sentiment would not allow them to come back home.
That's true.
See?
There was a bounty on their head.
That's right.
Now, isn't it true that Jesse told you that Quantrill, after the war was over, he and his family moved into Texas and settled nearer
Well, a bunch
Waco?
of these wild-eyed writers, Bill, they put it down that Quantrill was killed in Kentucky. Well, that ain't exactly the way it was. His wife was in Kentucky, and the Quantrill's men was in Kentucky, and there was some, the Yankee soldiers was across a creek there, and Quantrill's men was on this side. So Quantrill told one of his men, go up on that hill and look over there and see what you can see. So the boy said, all right, and Quantrill said, take my horse. So this boy got on Quantrill's horse and rode up there, and when he got up there, they shot him from the other side and killed him. Well, when they run up there and investigated the saddlebags on the horse, there was all of Quantrill's papers in the saddlebags. See?
That's the way they put the label on him.
That's right, and word flew like wildfire. We've killed Quantrill. Well, Quantrill went and got his wife and his little girl and come to Texas.
Where did he settle in Texas?
And he settled at, now if I can think of it,
Osceola.
Osceola, Texas, a little bitty place.
Where is
And
it
he
located?
went back to teaching school because originally,
Where's it located?
I can't think,
In Hillsboro.
close to Hillsboro,
Right,
Texas.
17 miles.
Yeah. And he went back to teaching school there, and people at Osceola, they never dreamed that soft-spoken, kind man had once been the fierce Quantrill that got together the most fiercest band of guerrillas that the Civil War produced. But he did.
And Jesse told you that was the little town, Osceola, where he settled and raised a family.
Well, Jesse and Frank and Ozark Jack and lots of the Quantrill men visited him there.
Yeah.
They went there to see him many times.
And what was his real name that he went by there?
Charles Hart.
Charles P. Hart, Jr.
Yeah. He had been educated in a military academy in Kentucky. Charles Hart had. But when the war between the states started and they wanted him to pledge his allegiance to the North, and his brother was in the Confederate Army and he was a Southerner. And he said he wanted to stay neutral. He didn't want to make any comment either way. He wanted to go on teaching. Well, when they told him he couldn't, then they come back and they took him out on the street and they beat him unmerciful. And when he got over that, his temper was so high that he just quit teaching school and he put together the Quantrill's guerrilla raiders. He dropped the name Hart and took the name William Clark Quantrill, C-L-A-R-K-E, William Clark Quantrill. And that it stayed with him until he come back to Texas, and he dropped the name Quantrill and picked up the name Hart. Him and his wife had one little girl. She married a man named Williams. Of course, it's 1940 dozen Williams, so I don't know. I don't know her husband's first name, but anyway, she she went to the Indian Territory, Oklahoma, and lived there. She lived to be grown and married, and I don't know how long she lived. But her name, she married a man by the name of Williams. They just had the one child, Charles Hart, and his wife did.
You remember when you called me one day, you said you found some papers that Jesse had left about Quantrill living at Osceola, and you asked me if I knew where it was. I said, I have no idea where it is. You said, well, Bill, will you research this for me? And I said, yes, I'm going back to Texas.
And you did.
I went down to Hillsboro and got a county map, and I found a little town north, 17 miles, off the main highway, and a little place, I guess there's 100 people there. That was just 2 or 3 years ago. And I went to the courthouse, I found the records, I found where his father, Charles P. Hart Sr., he got from the Texas Republic, when Texas got its independence in 1836, they didn't have any money, so they gave him, his daddy, for fighting in the Red War, they gave him 2 tracts of land.
He, if I'm not mistaken, Bill, ain't he the one that got the tract of land in one county and the other tract?
No, that was Billy's grandfather.
That's Billy's grandfather.
That's Benjamin,
yeah.
Benjamin Roberts.
Uh-huh.
See, he came from Lexington, Kentucky, and at that time, Texas was trying to get settlers to come in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came down the old Sabine River, crossed, and went down to Nacogdoches, Texas, the oldest settlement of Americans. And Stephen F. Austin, you've heard of him many times.
Oh,
He was the founder, the father of the Texas Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And his family lived there. And Billy's daddy was about, just a young kid. And so when the war, he fought in the war. When the war was over, they didn't have any money. So the first president of Texas, who was Lamar, president of the Texas Republic, he gave him 2 tracts of land.
Well, and one of them is in one county.
One is in where the county line of Hill County, and on the other side, Navarro County, which is about halfway between Waxahachie, Texas, and over at Hillsborough, Texas.
Yeah.
Now, Billy's
But
daddy
that piece of land, the county line
cut it in 2.
cut it in half, but it still belonged to
That's right.
as one piece of land.
That's right. But Billy's folks settled at Carlston, and I've got the warranty deeds
Yeah.
where in 1853 his daddy came there, and then his brothers. There was a big family, boys, you remember,
Yeah.
in the old original Roberts family.
Yeah, yeah.
So
oh,
everything.
Lord, there's more Roberts. There's almost as many Roberts as there is Johnsons.
That's right. Now you recall that I came back and I went through all the records, and I found Roberts after Roberts in Hamilton, Carlton, and Hyco.
Yeah.
And I want to say right now that everything you have given me to research in the past 6 years, and I've driven my car over 20,000 miles, and I've spent a bundle of money, I have yet to find anything that Jesse told you, that you told me, that I went and researched. I have yet to find one single area that was made. And if Jesse could not have made that up, but
Yeah.
I've got it.
It's just like the newspaper reporter said there at the Merrimack Cabin's birthday celebration. He said, if it wasn't the man, he wouldn't have known all those answers.
That's right.
It had to be him.
Ms. Everhard, now we've detained you several hours here, and I know it's been taxing to you,
Not to me.
but your memory has been very keen and sharp. And let me say this in final word I'd like for you to say. What would you like to see to come from all of this? You've held this material for 35 years. You've employed me for 5 years to do the research. Now, what is your objective?
Well, firstly, I'm, of course, as you know, I'm working on a book of facts about Jesse James. And I would like to see this come out in a television movie.
In other words, you'd like to see a television
I
series.
think it might kind of surprise a few people to show them that there's a lot of difference between facts and fiction. Facts is they're more fascinating than fiction is. You know?
Well, now, Ms. Everhard, while we're talking here and being recorded, what do you want me to do from this day on until we get it complete before we both enter eternity, whether it's 5 years or 10 years?
I told you we ain't got time for that. We got too much to do.
Well, we can't work on it another 35 years.
I'm going to be around over 100 years. Take your time.
Now, what do you want to see come from this?
I want to see I want it brought out so that the people will know some facts, the truth. They've lived under a umbrella of fiction for too many years.
Over 100 years.
And it's time that some of these people that's been making money and still are making money, and I could name some of them, from writing a bunch of baloney, it's time some truth come out, some facts come out.
And I think you have them.
And I'm just tired of that. I hear people, I get material in here that's been written by somebody, yakety, 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 yak. and they wouldn't know the truth if they met it out there in the driveway when it comes to what they've written. If I was as smart as some of them thinks they are, I'd run for president.
You wouldn't want that hard job.
But I'd like very much. I know it would please Uncle Jesse.
And
And I know it would please my mother to see the facts come out.
you knew that next month, on April the 11th, at Hyco, Texas, there's a great celebration going to take place.
You better believe it, and some of my friends from Austin, Texas is driving to Hyco.
They're going there for what purpose? To see the dedication and hear the dedication speech of Billy the Kid, because that town has accepted Brushy Bill Roberts, William Henry Roberts, as the one and only Billy the Kid.
That's right. Yeah. And I got a friend some friends in Austin. One of them's a young little chick. She ain't but 86, and she's gonna drive her gold Cadillac. And she's still working every day. She's a beauty operator, and she's gonna drive to Hyco unless she falls and breaks a leg or something, and come there to see that.
Well, now, in closing, let me say this, that I thank you and your husband and your hospitality for having us here, and I'll give you my word that I will continue to do my utmost to get this to the proper people.
Well, that's
The
what
public would like to know
I-
the truth.
that's what I want, and you'll never know. I won't even attempt to try to explain it to you, how deep I appreciate all the work you've put forth to help dig up all these records and show that it was just like Uncle Jesse said.
Well, that's our goal.
I deeply appreciate it, and you'll never know how much I appreciate it.
Well, we want the public to know it, and we want to know that 700 books have been written about Jesse, and 600 books have been written about Billy.
Couldn't see them, but I did. But in the paper, at the time Bigelow was killed by Bob Ford and panned off as being Jesse James, they stated in the 1882 St. Joseph, Missouri newspaper that there was no adult pictures of Jesse James. Mature, I believe, is the words they use, but that's the same thing. Well, now, and so therefore nobody actually knew how Jesse James looked, except Jesse James, his kinfolks, and close friends.
Right.
So how could they run around and say it wasn't Jesse James? They didn't know how he looked. And then when he acted as pallbearer, people were astounded. Nobody knew who the strange man was, but he handled everything, you know. And Uncle Jesse told me, he said, the Pinkertons was running wild hunting the James boys. Me and Frank have stood on the streets and talked to them. We knew who they was, but they didn't know who we was. And one time I was there in Austin when he was at home with us, I was sitting by his bed talking to him. He said, you know, back in my outlaw days, they wondered a lot of times how I always knew which train was carrying the most money. But they never knew. He said, me and the boys would go into town, and then I'd take one. Said we never went in a group. They went two at a time. And he said then, when we'd all get in there, I'd take one of the boys and go out at the edge of town, and I'd go up a telephone pole, tap the line, and read the Morse code, because he said I read Morse code, the old Morse code. And I knew exactly what was on that train. And said they never did know that. Said, you bring you a pencil and paper when you come back out to the hospital tomorrow, and I'll give you the whole alphabet in Morse code. And I did.
But isn't it true that they tried, it's so bad, so many robberies, that the railroads would put a dummy train up ahead,
Sure.
thinking they would attack that one?
That's why he needed to read the Morse code, so he'd know which train was carrying money and which one was a dummy.
Well, you knew that a lot of historians have said they never have been able to figure out how he knew which train carried the money and which didn't.
Well, that's what I'm telling you. He read the Morse code and he knew.
The money was carried in the baggage car.
That's right. Yeah. He knew exactly which train. That's his knowledge of Morse code come in pretty handy.
Right.
He said they never figured out how we always knew. They'd send this dummy train through, and then the one coming carrying the money and valuables would be behind it. So to make sure of which train was which, Uncle Jesse'd just go out and climb the pole, tap the line, read the Morse code, so they knew exactly. It wasn't no monkey business with him. And when he'd pull a robbery, instead of him, these wild western movies, they show him and his men on a horse and they're just going like lightning down the road. That's a bunch of malarkey. When Uncle Jesse robbed a train, him and his men, the men took the horses and the money and went on to their arranged meeting place. You understand what I mean? Jesse himself would ride the rods of the train and go right back where he started out from, where the train was going to stop next stop. And he'd get off the train and listen to the reaction of the people with all the excitement, because them terrible James boys had robbed the train.
Well, Ms. Everhard,
That's how he handled his robbery.
we've been here now.
And I happened to be in the hospital room with Uncle Jesse when you remember in the 50s when the Brinks robbery occurred? Well, I don't know what bit Austin's newspaper people, but one of those newspaper men snuck out and he got real gutty. He come up to the hospital to see Uncle Jesse. And I was in there when he talked to him. And he asked Uncle Jesse, he said, well, you was an outlaw? And Uncle Jesse said, yes, for 19 years. He said, well, where would you look for the robbers of the Brinks robbery if you was looking for them? Uncle Jesse said, well, I wouldn't spread out and go all over everywhere. I'd go right back into the crowd where it happened and look there. Said, your robbers is in the crowd, close there. Do you know when they found them, they really found them close? Uncle Jesse told the reporter, he said, it's a damn good thing I'm where I'm at and Frank's dead, because if it wasn't, the James boys would get the blame for this.
Ms. Everhard, now we spoke a while ago, I just happened to think of this, that with Frank James being a Texas Ranger at the same time under Captain Pat Garrett, who was the sheriff at the time here in New Mexico, that is alleged to have killed Billy. Mm-hmm. They were together at Tascosa, and the picture shows it. It's in 2 books, Maverick Town, and the other book was the book written by Leon Metz, on the story of the life of Pat Garrett. If Billy had been killed, didn't they take words of allegiance that they would kill anybody?
Just a minute, Bill. As I told you, Billy was the son of a Quantrill man. Jesse James, Frank James, and many others was Quantrill men. Don't you know if Pat Garrett had killed Billy the Kid, a son of one of the Quantrill men, that anybody that had killed Billy wouldn't have lived to tell it. If one Quantrill man didn't take it up, another would, because they took an oath to stick together, and they stuck till they died.
And they did after the war, as you said. About 175 of the key men of the Quantrill groups moved into Texas, and we can find where they settled.
Absolutely.
Sweetwater, Texas, Alpine, Texas, Wichita Falls, Osceola, Round Rock, Wichita Falls.
There's several other places that I've got. See, I got quite a long list, and I keep adding to the Quantrill men. They strode all Texas and Oklahoma too. See? And some of them in Oklahoma, they got land there, and they run for land. And some few of them settled around Ardmore and the Chickasaw Nation. but most of them come to Texas. The great majority of the Quantrill men.
It was a safe place for them.
Yeah.
Well, again,
But if it had been, if Billy had got killed as they've been rattling about all these years, the killer wouldn't have lived to tell you.
that's right.
So there's another point right there. It wasn't Billy the Kid, but Billy said he knew the boy as Billy Barlow. Well, Billy Barlow was a name you hung on a cowboy that didn't want to tell his actual true name.
And that was very common there.
And that was as common as pig tracks, because there was a Billy Barlow that worked for my daddy when my daddy was a ranch foreman on the ranch up here close to Claude. And I talked to an old rancher that lived here in Lovington, and he said when he was out on the ranch, they had a boy there that didn't know his name, and he didn't want to tell it. And, you know, years ago, if you got to questioning a man too much, you didn't live very healthy after that, you know. So whatever name he gave, you just took it and went on. He didn't want to tell his name, he just hung Billy Barlow on him and went on.
Another thing about Billy that proves up a lot, we don't have any evidence that Billy ever wrote anything. We have a lot of letters that's supposed to have been written, but you know for a fact that all the letters you got from Billy's wife, Lizzie, his last wife, they were in her handwriting.
Well, not all of them. His stepdaughter wrote one.
Well,
too.
stepdaughter.
Uh-huh.
Well, again, we spent 4 hours here now, Ms. Everhard, and it's been our pleasure.
It's been pleasant 4 hours.
And
I enjoy reminiscing back sometimes.
I would like to make a closing word. As I've stated before, I have worked for this lady for 6 years, researching everything that she had in her possession from Jesse and Billy, and to this day I have completed our research, and it's absolutely truth. Billy told the truth. Everything he told. His third and fourth cousins are now living in East Texas. Some of them will be present on April the 11th at Hyco for the dedication of the monument they put up for Billy. And I want to say that the historians are wrong. They thought they were doing right. The evidence they had was sketchy, and it was customary, as Ms. Everhard said, that any person who could write a story in a 10-cent magazine or so on, they published it because there was widespread interest in the West. As we know today, we hear of it in our newspapers and on TV, there is a renewed interest in Western folklore
Very much so.
today.
At this
And
particular time.
that's right. And the public wants to see and hear the new version rather than all these old copycats. You can go in any public library. You can look up Jesse James. You can look up Billy the Kid, and you'll find the same writings, the same thing. And all you have is one historian
It's
after
soup-warmed
another
over. It's just
will
only
just,
soup-warmed
that's
over.
right, they copy, they take their notes, and they rehash it, put it in their own words, and say, I am a research historian. I would say, to my knowledge, I am the only modern historian that knows the total story with this lady. And she knows more about it than I do. But I have proven everything that she has found to be true.
I've been getting letters from all over the country in so many states I can't even remember how many, and from Canada, and they're all saying, we want the truth.
It's true.
We are tired of all this fiction.
Well, Ms. Everhard, you want to know what the book companies write me when I ask them about putting out a new book? They say, we are definitely interested if you can bring something fresh and have historical background to offset all the books that we have. But
Never fear, when we bring out what we've got, it'll be new.
And it'll be documented.
You better believe it.
And we have these relatives over in East Texas. I communicate with them constantly by letter and telephone, and they have written me. They acknowledge that Billy the Kid was their third cousin. They've gone back in their genealogy to their grandmother and on down. And they called him Oliver Roberts. That was his birth name insofar as they were concerned. But they did not know of his early
Well,
childhood.
see, Billy, in all sincerity, Billy went to his aunts to tell her about her son, Oliver.
That's right.
And he looked so much like him,
His cousin.
and she mistook him. And poor little old Billy didn't have the guts to tell her any different. He should have, but he didn't.
That's right. Well, it's been our pleasure, Mr. Duffy and myself, and meeting you again.
It's been a pleasure to have you.
And you and Aubrey, you've been very, very cordial. We appreciate it.
I feel like that it's been an enjoyable day to me.
I would like to give my name, full name, and address where anybody, if this gets into the public hand. My name is W.A. Tunstill, Post Office Box 995, Roswell, New Mexico, zip code 88201. I'll be happy to hear from anyone, and anyone would like to question anything that I've said. I'd be most happy to give you concrete proof. Thank you.